Epigraph. I think human beings must have faith or must look for faith. Otherwise our life is empty. Empty. To live and not to know why the cranes fly, why children are born, why there are stars in the sky. You must know why you are alive, or else everything is nonsense, just blowing in the wind. Chapter 1. Running. Cocksucker motherfucker was my favorite expression, and at 8 years old, I used it defiantly. I was a spunky, sassy mess, and when I spewed that expression, one hand would be on my hip, my middle finger in vast display, and maybe my tongue would be sticking out. If the situation was especially sticky, as backup I would call upon my big sister Anita. She instilled fear in every boy, girl, woman, man, and dog in Central Falls, Rhode Island. She grew her nails to be a better fighter. She was tough, stylish, talented, and angry. When I saw. It was my way of reminding you of who the hell I was. In the 3rd grade, I challenged the fastest boy at Hunt Street School, in Central Falls, to a race at recess. It was the dead of winter and everyone showed up. I had my crew, which was mostly girls, and he had his, which was, well, everybody else. My shoes were 2 sizes too small and my socks were torn, the part that was supposed to cover my toes. So I took them off and gave them to my friend Rosie, who said to me, "Beat his ass." I didn't beat him. We tied, which was great for ol' underdog me, but humiliating for him. It was bedlam after that. Every kid in the schoolyard started chanting, "Rematch, rematch, come on, Chris, you can't let that girl beat you." I peeked at them in a huddle, laughing, staring at me, whispering, "You can't let that nigga beat you." When the teachers heard the commotion and saw my bare feet, I had to stand in the corner, in shame, as if I had done something wrong. Why all the vitriol? I was being bullied constantly. This was one more piece of trauma I was experiencing. My clothes, my hair, my hunger, too, and my home life being the big daddy of them all. The attitude, anger, and competitiveness were my only weapons, my arsenal. And when I tell you I needed every tool of that arsenal every day, I'm not exaggerating. At the end of each school day, we had to get in line at the back door and wait until the final bell rang. The teacher would open the door, and everyone would dash out to go home. Everyone would get excited because it was the end of the day. Everyone, except me. As much as I could, I would push and shove my classmates, almost clawing my way to the front of the line, not caring in the least if they got pissed at me. Because when that bell rang, I had to start running. I had to escape. A boy in my class who was Cape Verdean, from the Cape Verde Isles off the coast of West Africa, was black and Portuguese and as black as I was, but he didn't want to be associated with African Americans, a mindset I later learned was very common among Cape Verdeans in Central Falls. More often than not, they self-identified as Portuguese. They would kill you if you called them black. So my Portuguese classmate and 8 or 9 white boys in my class made it their daily end of school ritual to chase me like dogs hunting prey. When that end of school bell rang, it was off to the races, running literally to save my life. For the gang of boys, it was sadistic fun time. Every day it was the same madness, the same trauma, me taking off like Wilma Rudolph or Flo Jo, and them tight on my heels. While chasing me down, they would pick up anything they could find on the side of the road to throw at me. Rocks, bricks, tree branches, batteries, pine cones, and anything else their devious eyes spied. But running me down and throwing projectiles at me wasn't enough for them. Their vitriolic screams were aimed at the target of their hate. They threw, "You ugly, black nigger. You're so fucking ugly. Fuck you." Thank God I was fast. I had to run my ass off down Eben Brown Lane, the route I would take because it was a shortcut to get home. An idyllic road that looked like a scene from the Brady Bunch. At times, the boys would hide behind houses on that street and I would have to duck and dodge and crisscross. I was being hunted. By the time I got home, I was a snot-dripping, crying mess. Every day. One day after a snowstorm, the snow was piled so high in the streets anyone could hide behind the giant mounds that seemed to be everywhere. My shoes had huge holes on the bottoms, which meant I couldn't run fast in them because they would make my feet hurt worse than they did already. Because of this, during my daily runs for my life, I would usually take my shoes off, hold them in my hands, and run in bare feet. but with mountains of snow everywhere, I couldn't this time. As a result, they caught me, and when they did, they held my arms back and took me to their leader, the Cape Verdean boy. I don't mention names because, well, their race is way more important in telling this story. She's ugly. Black fucking nigger, he said. My heart was beating so fast. I kept silently praying for someone to come and save me, and the other voices sounded around me. What should we do with her? Yeah, you're fucking ugly. You're ugly. You're ugly. I don't know why you're saying that to me. I pleaded to the ringleader, the Portuguese boy. You're black, too. And when I said that, everyone froze and fell deathly silent. For a split second, we were all in a movie, as all the now silent white boys looked at the Portuguese boy, eager to respond to anything he said. You're black, too, I yelled at this time, calling him by name. The gang remained silent, so quiet. He looked and looked and looked from one white boy to another, frightened and struggling to find a way to hide the truth of what I had just said. The kind of truth that's rooted in a self-hate that we would rather take to our graves. Finally, he screamed in intense anger, "Don't you ever call me fucking black. I'm not black. I'm Portuguese." And he punched me in the arm, really hard. He looked down, ashamed at being called out, as if I exposed the ugliest, most painful truth. Get out of my face. Then they threw me in the snow and kicked snow on me. My arm stiffened. It was in pain. I walked home, completely humiliated. The next day I didn't want to go to school. My mom was doing the laundry in one of those old washing machines where you had to pull the clothes through the wringer. "What's wrong with you?" she asked. "Mama, those boys want to kill me. They chase me every day after school." After keeping it from her for months, I finally told her about my ongoing daily trauma. Viola, the southern pronunciation of my name. Don't you run from those bastards anymore. You hear me? Soon as that bell rings you walk home. They mess with you, you jug 'em. Jug is country for stab. But if you know what a crochet needle looks like, my mom was actually being ethical. They are not sharp at all. She gave me a crochet needle and told me to keep it in my pocket. It was her shiny blue one. "Don't come back here crying about those boys or I'll whop yo ass." She meant it. This was a woman with 6 kids. She didn't have time to go to school every day and fight our battles. She absolutely needed me to know how to defend myself, even if she had to threaten me into doing it. The next day, it took every bone, muscle, and cell in my body to walk after that bell rang. I could hear the voices of the boys behind me. I could feel their rage, the hate, but I walked extra slow, so slow I barely moved. My fingers were wrapped around that shiny blue crochet needle in my pocket. The voices got louder and closer. Finally, I felt one grab my arm violently, and an anger, a finality, an exhaustion came over me. I whispered, "If you don't get your hands off me, I'll jug you." He looked at me terrified, searching my face to see if I meant it. I did. He let me go and the rest of them walked away laughing. The ritual of chasing the nappy-headed black girl had suddenly lost its luster. Years later, a conversation I had on the set of Suicide Squad with Will Smith was an aha moment. Will asked me, "Viola, who are you? What does that mean?" "I know who I am," I replied with indignant confidence. He asked again, "No, but who are you? What does that mean?" I asked again. "Look, I'm always going to be that 15-year-old boy whose girlfriend broke up with him. That's always going to be me. So, who are you? Who am I?" I was quiet, and once again that indestructible memory hit me. Then I just blurted it out. "I'm the little girl who would run after school every day in 3rd grade because these boys hated me because I was not pretty, because I was black." Will stared at me as if seeing me for the first time and just nodded. My throat got tight and I could feel the tears welling up. Memories are immortal. They're deathless and precise. They have the power of giving you joy and perspective in hard times. Or they can strangle you, define you in a way that's based more in other people's tucked up perceptions than truth. There I was, a working actress with steady gigs, Broadway credits, multiple industry awards, and a reputation of bringing professionalism and excellence to any project. Hell, Oprah knew who I was. Yet, sitting there conversing with Will Smith, I was still that little, terrified, 3rd grade black girl. And though I was many years and many miles away from Central Falls, Rhode Island, I had never stopped running. My feet just stopped moving. I had all the brawn in the world but hadn't mastered the courage part. This is the memory that defined me. More than the bedwetting, poverty, hunger, sexual abuse, and domestic violence. It is a powerful memory because it was the first time my spirit and heart were broken. I defined myself by the fear and rage of those boys. I felt ugly. I felt unwanted, even by God. I wanted so badly to fit into this world, but instead I was being spit out like vomit. Who I was offended them. The memory burrowed itself inside me and metastasized. It didn't help that I was running back to a home where there was no protection. A home that seemed to cement all the horrific things those boys said about me. At the age of 28, I woke up to the burning fact that my journey and everything I was doing with my life was about healing that 8-year-old girl. That little third grader Viola who I always felt was left defeated, lying prostrate on the ground. I wanted to go back and scream to the 8-year-old me, stop running. I wanted to heal her damage, her isolation. That is, until a therapist a few years ago asked me, "Why are you trying to heal her?" I think she was pretty tough. She survived. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I was speechless. What? No poor little chocolate girl from Central Falls. She's a survivor. He leaned forward as if to tell me the biggest secret, or to solve the biggest obstacle of my existence. Can you hug her? Can you let her hug you? He asked. Can you let her be excited about the 53-year-old she is going to become? Can you allow her to squeal with delight at that? I sat there with my arms crossed. No way. I'm the one who made it out. I have the authority. I looked over at the empty space next to me on the couch and saw my younger self so clearly. She sat there waiting. To be embraced. To be acknowledged. To be let in. He leaned toward me, staring at me, tough, stout, insistent, and said, "It's the 53-year-old that needs some help." Silence is all I could muster by way of response. That little girl survived, he stated emphatically. I kept my arms crossed. Steely, he leaned back and waited for those arms to uncross. They never did. The final stretch to finding me would be allowing that 8-year-old girl in. Actively inviting her into every moment of my current existence to experience the joy she so longed for. Letting her taste what it means to feel truly alive. The destination is finding a home for her, a place of peace where the past does not envelop the Viola of now, where I have ownership of my story. For my speaking gigs, the title of my presentations is always the same. The Journey of a Hero. I learned from writer Joseph Campbell that a hero is someone born into a world where they don't fit in. They are then summoned on a call to an adventure that they are reluctant to take. What is the adventure? A revolutionary transformation of self. The final goal is to find the elixir, the magic potion that is the answer to unlocking her. Then she comes home to this ordinary life transformed and shares her story of survival with others. That's exactly how I describe my story. As a child, I felt my call was to become an actress. It wasn't. It was bigger than that. It was bigger than my successes, bigger than expectations from the world. It was way bigger than myself, way bigger than anything I could have ever imagined. It was a full embracing of what God made me to be, even the parts that had cracks and where the molding wasn't quite right. It was radical acceptance of my existence without apology and with ownership. I saw that young girl so clearly that day in my therapist's office. I could hear her saying, "You are my home. Let me in." When she still didn't receive a hug, she got more passionate. That younger self was sitting there saying, "So, what? You're not going to let me in." I ran my fucking leg of the race. I passed the baton to yo ass. All those cocksucker motherfuckers. Shit, I know I was inappropriate, but shit, it got you here. Telling those boys to kiss my black ass. The crying, the piss in the bed. I still see her sitting, staring, arms to her side with her little fro and hand-me-down jeans, waiting. My journey was like a war movie, where at the end, the hero has been bruised and bloodied, traumatized from witnessing untold amounts of death and destruction, and so damaged that she cannot go back to being the same woman who went to war. She may have even seen her death but was somehow resurrected. But to go on that journey, I had to be armed with the courage of a lioness. Man, I'd rather go 10 rounds with Mike Tyson than face some inner truths that have lain dormant. Hell, at least with Mike, I can throw the fight. But this inner battle, this inner fight I couldn't throw. That day in my therapist's office, the goal was clear and repetitive. Individuals on the journey eventually find themselves experiencing a baptism by fire. It's that moment when they are just about to lose their lives, and they miraculously, courageously find the answer that gives their life meaning. And that meaning, that answer, saves them. In the words of Joseph Campbell, in The Hero with a Thousand Faces, the call to adventure signifies that destiny has summoned the hero. The hero, whether god or goddess, man or woman, the figure in a myth, or the dreamer of a dream, discovers and assimilates his opposites, his own unsuccessful self, either by swallowing it or by being swallowed. I still see my younger self so clearly from that fateful day in my therapist's office. She stands up, in tears, on a mound of snow. Pissed off, she shouts, "Bitch, I'm not going to be swallowed." Chapter 2. My world. Voila. All your uncles and aunties was in the house eating, dancing, waiting for you to be born. Me Alice Davis. When my mom told me my birth story several years ago, I was quite surprised. My mama has a tendency to spontaneously tell shocking stories, relatives messing around with each other, how she started taking care of her siblings when she was 4 years old, my father's cheating. Well, buried in the midst of all these fabulously horrid stories, there was a sweet tale, my birth story. My mama has 2 very southern phrases that are a cause of heavy laughter and a source of great comfort for my siblings and me. One is ma, which she calls us, her children, as a form of affection. The other is "and stuff like that in thaw." She sprinkles this phrase into sentences liberally. In her South Carolina accent, she said, "Voila, when you were born and stuff like that in thaw. All your uncles and aunties and stuff like that in thaw, everybody was there. They was drinking and dancing and stuff like that in thaw, waiting for you to come. Miss Clara Johnson and stuff like that in thaw was late, so your grandmama delivered you. Everybody was happy." When she first told me, I allowed a long gulp of silence after she finished. I was waiting for the shoe to drop. I was waiting for some unbelievable, traumatic interjection, something that interfered with the beauty of it. But the horrible never came. It was a normal, beautiful story of family centered around my arrival in the land of the living. To my shock, my birth story didn't confuse me or induce pain or numbness in the core of my being. It was simply a tale of love and life. I love that story so much and ask my mom to repeat it often. I mean, a lot. And every time she retells it, she tops the story off with this wonderful addition: that she ate a sardine, onion, tomato, and mustard sandwich right after she gave birth to me. A disgusting concoction, I know, but she explained it was the best sandwich I ever ate. She named me Viola after my great-aunt on my father's side. On August 11, 1965, in St. Matthews, South Carolina, I was born, the 5th of 6 children, in my maternal grandmother and grandfather's house on the Singleton plantation. And yes, it was and still is a plantation, not a farm. Drive down the long, dusty road leading into the 160 or so acres and you'll come to the big, white, beautiful plantation home. Drive a little farther and there's the tiny, one-room church. An even farther venture will deliver you to the doorsteps of the sharecroppers' houses, outhouses, outdoor showers, and a well. My maternal grandparents, Mosel and Henry Logan, like the other sharecroppers, had a one-room house with a big fireplace. Their daughter, Ma Mama, the oldest of 18 children, left school after the 8th grade because she got pregnant, but also because she was beaten a lot in school. I mean beaten to where it broke skin and she bled. My grandmother and my aunt had to go to the school and confront the teacher, who was black but lighter skinned and suffering from the all-too-common interracial disease of colorism. She was punishing my mom because she was dark-skinned, came from the country, the backwoods, and had nappy hair. My mama's family didn't have indoor toilets, showers, or bathrooms. That, mixed with the sheer number of kids and the desperate poverty, meant she often smelled like piss. Another shame that justified the teacher's fear and anger toward darker-skinned Ma Mama. Once again, an association of everything that is wrong and negative with skin shade. All I know is, I felt a different level of being heartbroken for my mom when I learned the real driving force behind her decision not to return to school. My mother pushed on with her life, nonetheless. She was married and had her first child, my brother, John Henry, at age 15. She had my sister Diane when she was 18, Anita at 19, Dolores at 20, and me at 22. Years later, at age 34, she had my sister Danielle. Only 11 of Mosul and Henry Logan's 18 children survived. Mama, obviously, being one of them. Several were stillborn, and one my mother constantly talks about died in a fire as a newborn. That baby was named Dolores. Mama tells me that she was about 4 or 5 years old and had the mammoth responsibility of taking care of her younger siblings. As she tells it, she would take the binky from her own mouth to put in her brother's mouth. That was how young she was. Like most children at that time, while the adults worked in the fields, the children were left home alone, unattended. Often, they cooked, cleaned, and changed diapers. She was playing with matches one day in the open fireplace of their wooden shack, and the rug caught fire. It scared Mama tremendously. She had the presence of mind to grab her younger brother Jimmy and run out of the house. As the house went up in flames, she couldn't reach her younger sister, who was in the back room. When Dolores was found, she was beautifully intact, but she had died of smoke inhalation. She was a beautiful baby, like a doll, moaned Mama. Unfortunately, Mama was blamed for Dolores's death and subsequently beaten by both her father and mother. She says she still has problems to this day with the arm that was beaten. Mama tells this story on a loop. Finally, after so many years, I told her, "You know that was not your fault. It was not your fault. I'm giving you permission to forgive yourself. Your parents were wrong for beating you. It was an accident. You should not have even been in that position." Painful silence. Then she simply changed the subject. I know Mama will never forgive herself, even though years later we saw the death certificate that shows Mama couldn't have been more than 3 years old. Not 4 or 5. When her baby sister died, I love staring at my mom. I take in every detail of her face, hands, skin. I see all the scars. Some I remember from abuse she endured, and some I don't. The sore left arm. The scar on her right forearm made by my dad ripping her arm open. Scars on her face, legs. Scars. I think about the complexity of her childlike heart compared to the ferocious, maternal warrior who would angrily snatch her wig off to kick anybody's ass who even thought about harming her babies. I think about her bravery in fighting for welfare reform in the 1970s, getting arrested, holding us with one arm and waving her fist with the other as we were herded into wagons. Her speaking at Brown University. I may have had an 8th grade education and I was nervous, but I spoke. I think of the woman who survived horrific sexual abuse only to marry my dad who was an abuser, yet after many years became a true partner. All that comes to mind when I look at one of the great loves of my life, my mother, and listen to her retell the same stories. That doctor said you were gonna have a water bucket head, a big stomach, and bow legs, my mom said in between eating bites of rice and drinking her mimosa. She was telling a story of when I was about 2 years old. You was at Memorial Hospital. You was just a baby. They had you all hooked up to machines and all that crust and matter like that and thaw around your eyes and nose. Your daddy went there to see you and it was the first time I seen him cry like a baby. I knew I had bad milk. The doctor said you weren't going to develop like, you know, normal. Mama was visiting my house in Los Angeles telling this story. It was on a day off from shooting How to Get Away with Murder. We were in the backyard. I knew the story by heart, but listened anyway. He wanted to experiment on you. He said he was gonna break your legs to see if they grew straight. But I saw how he was looking at me. I ain't dumb. He saw that I was poor and black. I took you from that hospital. That doctor kept saying, "Mrs. Davis, you're making a big mistake." But I told him he wasn't gonna experiment on my baby. I took you to Miss Cora's house and she made you some lima bean soup. And you ate the whole bowl and drank a big glass of cold water. And that was it. Miss Cora was our distant relative who lived in Prospect Heights, a low-income housing project in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Miss Cora said, "Ain't nothing wrong with this baby." And after you ate that soup you hugged Miss Cora's leg and wouldn't let go. I just listened, always silent. I have a vague memory of this moment hugging Miss Cora's leg, feeling gratefulness. But just that moment. I know that doctor's not alive now cause this was when you were a baby. But I wish he could see you now, she says, as always, with a great burst of joy. Smiling, laughing. You ain't got no bow legs or big stomach. Your head is big. But that's what make you a good actor. Viola, make your mama another one of these mimosas or, you know what I mean, no matter what. I cannot get her to remember mimosa, so I stopped trying because I sort of enjoy it. I run to make her another mimosa, more juice than champagne, anxiously getting up the courage to ask a very risque question. Anything to pry secrets from her. The water bucket head hospital story is one of her favorites. I grew up hating it. I let her get it out of the way before I ask her something more challenging. One of the beauties of getting older is really getting to know a parent. Ooh, Mom, did you ever have an affair? Fall in love with someone else? Did you have an affair with Howie? Howie was a really nice white guy who lived on the second floor of 128 Washington Street, an apartment building we lived in. Every time my father would beat my mom, she would run to Howie's apartment. He would wash her wounds and let my mom hide out in his apartment until my dad calmed down. Picture the stereotypical 70 seconds hippie. That was Howie. He would play the guitar for us and give us candy. Just regular candy, no hippie additives. No, Viola, I never did nothing with Howie. He was just a nice guy. His daddy always accused me of messing with him. I have to say, I was disappointed with that one. I was waiting for not only something salacious but sort of wanted my mom to have some story where she harnessed her joy, desires, or a tiny bit of happiness, even if it was from an affair. She took another sip, but I did fall in love with my gynecologist. I perked up. OHHH. Really, Viola, I was pregnant with Danielle and, you know, he was taking care of me, listening to me. I was so sensitive at that time, and he was so nice. I waited for more, but that was it. She had feelings for a man who cared for her, as stubborn as a bull, as innocent as a child, and loyal even when she has been abandoned. Thank God for mimosas, or as mama calls them, mimosas. When I was young, I thought, perhaps arrogantly, that I could do better than my mom. I was going to slay dragons, be stronger and more confident. I wasn't going to run from bad memories. I would be a hero, an overcomer. But you know the saying, show me a hero and I'll show you a tragedy. As a theater geek, I learned that tragedies always end with the downfall of the hero. Everyone who is influenced by them, who benefits from them, who relies on them is crushed in their downfall. Heroes always cause their own downfall, like Oedipus. I didn't want to cause my own downfall. I didn't want to move through my life and not be accountable for recklessness. I wanted to be aware of my Achilles heel. I believed awareness was what would release my blessings. I had no idea the mammoth task I was asking the universe. In one of my mother's episodes of dropping spontaneous and extremely important facts, without warning or context, she told me that although she has gone by Mary Alice Davis for most of her life, her real name is actually me, Emma. She always says, not Emma. Why she renamed herself Mary early in life because all the girls in the country were named me. And she didn't want to be like everyone else. How badass is that? The woman I tried so hard not to be was the muse sitting on my shoulder in How to Get Away with Murder. She didn't tell me or my sisters about her name change until much later in life. I was 35 when I found out. It wasn't a legal change, just a personal one. When she told me, it was absolutely not a confession, but a correction. It was almost as if she was insulted that I said her name wrong. I was sending her money via Western Union, like I always did. Viola, stop writing Mary. My name ain't Mary. It's me, Emma E. You keep writing my name wrong. Silence. Mama, what are you talking about? You've always been Mary Alice Davis. Viola, I've always been me. I just never liked that name. Everyone in the country was named me. I'm confused, but my ID says me, so send it to me Alice Davis. Silence. Viola, you heard what your mama said, didn't you? Ooh, yeah, sure, ma. I just went with it. As confused as I was, I didn't want to ask questions because she didn't seem to be open to it. Plus, she would whoop my ass when I saw her next. I'm not kidding. 2 generations removed from slavery, as docile as she appeared at times, she had a brutal right hook. So I didn't bring up that her sister's name was Mary. An interesting sidebar to her name change from me to Mary. As much as I try to chisel into Mama to get at the core of who she is, I never can. There are decades of suppressed secrets, trauma, lost dreams and hopes. It was easier to live under that veil and put on a mask than to slay them. Unlike my mother, my father was a simpler man. Dan Davis was born in 1936 in St. Matthews, South Carolina. As far as I know, he had 2 sisters. For the life of me I can't remember. But he had, I believe, a poor relationship with his stepfather, whose last name was Duxon. Daddy says his education went as far as 5th grade, but evaluating his penmanship over the years, I would say my father's formal education ended closer to 2nd grade. He may not have been educated, but he was not a dumb man. Illiterate at 15, he learned to read because his friend taught him by looking at billboards on the side of the road. At 15, after years of abuse, he ran away from home to work as a horse groomer at racetracks around the country. He groomed some of the greatest racehorses in history, and yet he hated the work. Mama woefully says that my father never groomed Secretariat. We still have photos of him in the winner's circle because the groom was nearly always in the picture when a horse won. I loved going to work with my father when I was younger. I loved being around the horses. Even the smell of the manure, hay, and horse food excited me. Looking at the horses in their stables and feeding them with my father is a happy memory. When the owners came and directed my father about how to brush the horses and how to feed them, the atmosphere transformed into something very different. When my father was around those men, it was almost as though he was a slave and they were masters. He would be juggling 5 tasks at once. The huge syringe with vitamin shots for the horse, the different mixtures of feed, the grooming brushes and hay. They had no understanding of how much they were asking him to do at any given moment. I could feel his frustration, his anger, but what choice did he have? To make matters worse, grooms were barely paid a living wage. Imagine hauling your family from the south with all the hope in the world that you could do better. Yet all you have, all that you can do is not good enough to keep them alive and functioning. I could tell he was happy that I had witnessed the difficulties of his job. It was a way, I think, for him to validate that what was happening to him was real. But my father, whom we called Ma Daddy, was more than his work. He was a great storyteller. Dad was also a pretty good guitar and harmonica player. He absolutely loved soul, jazz, and the blues, especially B.B. King. Because Ma Daddy is gone now, I will never know what demons caused him to run away from his home at 15. As much as I love my father, I know those demons haunted him his entire life. They embedded themselves deep within him and boiled into rage and alcoholism. That rage was usually released on payday. I've always been an introvert, and when I was young, I was extremely shy. At an early age, I became a keen observer of the world around me. I blended into the wall in almost every setting, and I was able to see without saying a thing. What I saw in my father was a man who, alone and single, could have kept his check and spent it all on women and booze. But he wasn't alone. During my childhood, my father had 5 children to feed. Every penny he worked for had to go to us, even with the hard labor, enduring the disrespect from white horse owners. It was never enough. So, he raged. He had open affairs. The only other woman I vividly remember was Patricia. Patricia was a very large woman who lived near Railroad Street in Central Falls. Railroad Street was at the edge of town, which was only a square mile. He would take me over there and always give me $1 or 75 cents in quarters to not tell Mama where we were going. Okay, Daddy, I'd say, excitedly taking the money. I was no more than 5 or 6. My dad was always very well dressed, and at various times would have a nice car. The car he had at this time was a convertible. Don't ask me how he was able to afford the car, but I do think of this time period as the good years, financially speaking. We would get to Patricia's apartment and she answered the door naked, which absolutely traumatized me. Shut me right down. She in no way attempted to cover up, neither her naked ass nor her ill intentions with my father. Rather, she ran into my father's arms, kissing him and giggling. "Oh, Dan, is this your baby?" I wanted to say, "Heifer, I'm Mama's baby, not yours." I hated her. My father would just say, "Go downstairs and wait for your daddy." Patricia would then close the door in my face, giggling. I hated going downstairs. They wanted me to play with this little girl who was my age. She had the best toys, but she never wanted to play with me. She never wanted me to touch her toys, and her mom would come out and shoo me away. I ended up just sitting there by myself, wanting my mom more than ever. My father would emerge after a long time and repeat, "Don't tell ya mama where we been." As soon as we got home, my mom asked, "Where y'all been?" We were at Patricia's house. Daddy gave me 75 cents to not tell. I blurted. My daddy would roll his eyes and all hell would break loose. The affair with Patricia ended when mama found out he was at the local bar with her. She told us that she would be right back. She left our apartment and went down to the bar and slapped the piss out of Patricia, who fell right off the bar stool. My father was livid and slapped my mom. Ironically, Patricia wrote my mom a letter explaining what a no-good asshole my daddy was. She kept the letter under her mattress for a long time and would pull it out to read. It would always make her depressed. My sisters and I would read it as well. In my fantasy, I always imagined her exploring what the hell to do with this information. I wish that mama could have acquired the tools to imagine a life free from that sort of pain. Rejecting everything her family had instilled in her about marriage and never giving up. Never leaving your man even if he cheats. Putting up with abuse. I imagined that if she had the language and the wherewithal, she would have simply said, "Help me, guide me." But even grown with multiple children, she was still that little 15-year-old black girl from the backwoods of South Carolina who got pregnant and married before she could legally drive. My older sister Diane retells a story of my mom and dad having a fight outside. My dad was screaming, "Me Alice, you want me to stay or leave? Tell me, you want me to stay or go?" My sister was sending telepathic messages in her mind. "Please tell him to go. Tell him to go, mama." But mama just screamed, "I want you to stay." It was a choice that had resounding repercussions. Abuse elicits so many memories of trauma that embed themselves into behavior that is hard to shake. It could be something that happened 40 years ago, but it remains alive, present. Like I said, Me Alice has a heart that simply is loyal. It attaches and asks for nothing in exchange. She shows her claws only when those she loves need protection or to protect who she feels belongs to her. She never raises her fist for her. There is a very flimsy barrier between the asshole predators, abusers, and my mom. She is a self-sacrificer at the expense of her own joy. My dad came home from the bar one night and collapsed inside our doorway. My mom screamed, "Y'all go to bed." She helped him to their bed. He had been stabbed in the back, his lower back on the left-hand side. I got up to peek. My mom took his shirt off and used a rag and peroxide to wipe the blood. It was deep and tissue was hanging out. He kept moaning and saying, "Me Alice, don't call the ambulance. Don't, Me Alice." My mom finally just stood over the bed and cried. I remember coming and standing next to her. She put her arms around me and said, "I can't do nothing. I can't do nothing." We just stood there and I remember waiting for him to die. I imagined what our lives would be like without him. I imagined a life with no more drunken rages and the constant abuse of my mom. I secretly felt how much better our lives would be. The next day, he was better. Death wouldn't come until 2006, and man, my prayers at that time were different. Every last breath he took, I took with him. Coming from St. Matthews, South Carolina, an area influenced by the Gullah culture of the Sea Islands, my father, as well as my mother, grew up believing in haints, evil spirits or ghosts. My father made haints present in our lives. We could not sweep over by his feet or he'd become livid, saying it meant he'd go to jail. He said he had already gone to jail for stabbing a guy who pulled his shirt over his head. We couldn't pass by a gravestone without crossing ourselves, performing the Catholic sign of the cross, or else the deceased person would not rest in peace. We'd have to spit on our finger, dig it in the dirt, and pass the grave again. We couldn't stare at ourselves in the mirror for very long in the dark, without turning on the light, or we would turn into a monster. If we woke up in the morning drowsy, not yet moving or speaking, my father would run into our room and ask, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" Before we could answer, he'd say, "The witch is ridden the broom." It's the Haints. I got it. He'd get paper or cloth, sprinkle on salt and pepper, and wave it over us to get the witch to ride off. Of course, as we fully woke and started to slowly move around, that was proof to Daddy that he had warded off the Haints. Victoriously, he would delve deeper. What happened? Did you have a bad thought about an old person who passed by you? Dolores, or I would mention the hairy old man down the street whom we thought looked like a monster. Mr. Mayaka to be exact. Mr. Mayaka was a fictitious character in a Joseph Jacobs folktale who ate little boys for supper. Every time this man passed by us, we would whisper to our baby sister, "Danielle, Danielle, here he comes, Mr. Mayaka." It would send chills up her spine, and whatever bad thing she was doing, she would stop immediately. That's it, Daddy would say, again waving the salt and peppered paper over us. Stop fucking with that man. You understand me. Stop even thinking bad thoughts about him. Because of Daddy, the myth of Haints was part of our lives. Haints, which are also mentioned in To Kill a Mockingbird, were my parallel growing up to the Furies I later learned about in Greek theater. The Furies are goddesses in Greek tragedies who come from the underworld to exact vengeance on a person who has done wrong. The purpose of Furies was to make the person accountable for their wrongdoing, even their part in generational curses. Daddy's Haint rituals reminded us to hold ourselves accountable. They bridged spaces that helped us learn to navigate life. They were interesting guideposts, of which I was never skeptical, until I was a teen. I bought into Haints 100% until it didn't make sense to me anymore. As I grew away from my parents, I tried to be my own person, dispelling what I'd been taught. I had two parents who were running away from bad memories. Both had undiscovered dreams and hopes. Neither had tools to approach the world to find peace or joy. Mama worked sporadically in factories and was a gambler. My father was an alcoholic and would disappear for months at a time when we were really young. He always came back, but by the time I was 5 I never remember him leaving for any long periods of time. Only later did I realize he was numbing, which is absolutely without question an understandable solution to dealing with a fucked up world. Then, he would come back, from who knows where, and beat my mama, lashing out instead of lashing in. He was inaccessible to us for most of my childhood. I did not know how to reach him. He was the first man who loved me, picked me up from school during lunch breaks before we had lunch in school. He would take me to a great mom and pop restaurant for wieners, hot dogs with ground meat, onions, and celery salt on top. He would put a quarter in the mechanical horsey machines and let me ride and smile from ear to ear, and then drive me back to school. He loved me, that I know, but his love and his demons were fighting for space within, and sometimes the demons won. One of the many defining memories of my dad is when I was 14. We were living at 4 Park Street, a 2-story, 2-family house. The upper floor had no electricity or heat, but at least it was 2 stories and we had the whole house. My baby sister, Danielle, was about 1.5 years old. I would die for her. She was the most precious gift to all of us. Well, my mom and dad were fighting. I never knew about what. Most of the time the fights just started because my dad wanted to vent. They were facing each other screaming and my dad picked up a glass. I grabbed my sister Danielle with one arm and put my other arm between my parents, willing them to stop. None of my other sisters were home. My older sister Diane left me a stern warning. If they start fighting this time, try to stop them. Up until this time, we had never tried to stop them for fear it would get worse, because it would. With my arm between them I was gently saying, "Please, Daddy, stop." It didn't work. "Tell me I won't bust your head open. Me Alice. Tell me I won't." Then he just swung his hand and smashed the glass on the side of my mom's head, and I saw the glass slice the upper side of her face near her eye and blood just squirted out. A lot of blood. I couldn't anymore. I just couldn't passively stand by as he lifted his hand to swing again. I yelled, "Stop. You just stop right now, Daddy. Give me the glass. Give it to me." I saw my hands shaking uncontrollably. My heart was in my throat. I was immersed in fear. He stood staring at my mom, wanting to swing again. My dad never looked at me. He kept his hand gripped on the glass, staring at my mom, his eyes bloodshot, wanting so bad to hit her again. I screamed, "Give it to me," screaming as if the louder I became the more my fear would be released. And he gave me the glass and walked away. I took the glass and hid it, and my body felt like I had just been beaten up or ran 30 miles. I had to stand up to my father, the authority figure, the one who should be taking the glass from me, teaching me right from wrong, the most frightening figure in my life and the first man we all ever loved. Frightening. Without knowing, I had already been imprinted, stamped by their behavior and all that they were. As much as I wanted my life to be better, the only tools I had to navigate the world were given to me by them. How they talked, how they fought, how my mom made concessions, how they loved and who they loved shaped me. If I didn't bust out of all that, would this exhaustion and depletion be what I would feel after every fight in my life? Even the small ones. That fight marked the beginning of my shift. Looking back on that night when I stood up to my dad and wiped up my mom's blood, I knew my life would be a fight, and I realized this, I had it in me. Chapter 3. Central Falls. Central Falls. Central Falls. Brave, courageous, and bold. Long live our name and long live our glory and long may our story be told. Motto of Central Falls High School. 2 months after I was born, my parents moved to Central Falls, taking their 3 youngest kids, Anita, Dolores, and me, and leaving their 2 oldest, Diane and John, with my mother's parents. Diane and John were raised by my grandparents for years until my mom could no longer stand to hear the stories of them being beaten in school. My parents sent for them to come to Central Falls. Central Falls, Rhode Island, was a square-mile town with a single claim to fame. One of the most densely populated cities per square mile in the United States. Central Falls also had more bars and churches in its borders than any other city. Central Falls, by 1985, was named the cocaine capital because one of the largest drug stings of all time happened in its streets. The sweet story, the idyllic story, was that it was once called Chocolateville because of the number of chocolate factories in town. To the naked eye, Central Falls seemed bucolic. There were several parks in Central Falls, but our favorite playground was at Jenks Park because of Cogswell Tower, the site where Native American scouts witnessed the approach of Captain Michael Pierce. This episode was a key part of King Philip's War, an armed battle from 1675 to 1678 between the Native Americans of New England and New England colonists. We moved there because 2 of the biggest racetracks in the country were in Rhode Island. There was the Lincoln Downs in Lincoln, and the Narragansett Racetrack in Narragansett, affectionately called Gansett. Mom and pop shops lined the streets of Central Falls. Sarah's restaurant had big wooden bench booths with high backs that fascinated me. Sarah's had homemade rice pudding, corn muffins fried with heaps of butter, and the best hamburgers in town. St. Vincent de Paul, located on Washington Street, had used clothes, shoes, toys, knickknacks, and furniture. It was our favorite playground of affordable leftovers. Across the street from St. Vincent de Paul's was Gabe's store, or, as we called it, Antor's. We have plenty of loving memories at that store, but complicated ones as well. Loving because the owner, Gabe Antor, who was Syrian, was very kind to our family. It was a wonderful grocery store, stocked with everything you could possibly need. Whenever we were really hurting, he would give us a line of credit so that we could buy food. It was complicated, though, because oftentimes, Mama and Daddy would ask Gabe for monetary loans. Gabe kept a notebook under the cash register with a tally of what various neighborhood families owed him. Some of my most embarrassing memories are going to the store with a piece of paper, on which my mother had written how much money she needed. Sometimes, the embarrassment was so great that my sister Dolores and I would tear up the paper and refuse to hand him the charity request. Instead, we would just tell my mom that Gabe denied the loan. And sometimes when we asked Gabe, he would, in frustration, throw money at us because my parents had not paid their outstanding debts. This nice man would fly into a rage and scream, "Get out." We would pick the money off the floor, humiliated, and walk out completely defeated. When we were really hungry, though, Gabe's was the easiest store to steal food from. Much later in life, I found out that Gabe had lost his son in Vietnam. It probably explained the frustration and sadness in his eyes. It might have also accounted for how kind he was to us as kids, and why he helped us when he saw our need. Our relationship with him was filled with love and appreciation mixed with the shame of having to cling so desperately to his willing kindness. which was all too often a lifesaver. When you're clutching to live, morals go out the window. We were po. That's a level lower than poor. I've heard some of my friends say, we were poor too, but I just didn't know it until I got older. We were poor and we knew it. There was absolutely no disputing it. It was reflected in the apartments we lived in, where we shopped for clothes and furniture. The St. Vincent de Paul, the food stamps that were never enough to fully feed us, and the welfare checks. We were po. We almost never had a phone. Often, we had no hot water or gas. We had to use a hot plate, which increased the electric bill. The plumbing was shoddy, so the toilets never flushed. Actually, I don't ever remember toilets working in our apartments. I became very skilled at filling up a bucket and pouring it into the toilet to flush it. And with our gas constantly being cut off because of non-payment, we would either go unwashed or would just wipe ourselves down with cold water. And even the wiping down was a chore because we were often without towels, soap, shampoo. I damn sure didn't know the difference between a washcloth and a bath towel. One of our first apartments was 128 Washington Street. My sisters and I ominously refer to it as 128. 128 is code for hell. When we first moved in, it was a normal apartment. I was 5 years old at the time. There was a tailor on the ground level, and on the third floor where we lived was a nice little porch. The building was old, probably built in the 22nd or 32nd, but it had been kept in fairly good condition. But then the tailor moved out, and very quickly the building became condemned. The tailor's business was boarded up. Without attention, the wiring became dangerously unstable. There were several fires, and the building soon became infested with rats. In fact, the rats were so bad, they ate the faces off my dolls. I never, ever went into the kitchen. Rats had taken over the cabinets and the counter. The plaster was constantly falling off the wall, revealing the wooden boards holding the house together. We had to go to the laundromat to wash clothes, but having no money, 5 kids, and freezing cold weather meant that most of the time laundry would go unwashed for weeks. That, compounded with the bedwetting, made for a home with a horrific smell. Closets and space underneath the beds would be stuffed with shoes, dust, miscellaneous items. We were afraid of even cleaning for fear rats would be lurking underneath all the rubbish. On the first day of the month, food stamps would come and we would make a huge grocery run at Big G Market. In less than 2 weeks, the food would be gone. A short time after we moved in, I remember Mayor Bissett came to the apartment and made a big speech in our living room, saying he was giving us the apartment for free. We didn't have to pay any rent. That was because the building was condemned. In a year, the city planned to tear it down to build a school. Mayor Bissett sent someone to the apartment who knocked a hole through one of the walls that led to the apartment next door, creating a makeshift doorway. That apartment next door never had any heat or electricity. Never. Even in the short spans that our apartment had heat and electricity, the one next door never did. But we had that space. We used it for bedrooms, running extension cords from the apartment that had electricity. Months later, I went to Mayor Bissett's house to sing Christmas carols. It was on the other side of town, the part where the rich folk lived, or the people who had a little bit of money. His house seemed to have 40-foot ceilings, a fireplace, a huge staircase, and a Christmas tree that was the largest I'd ever seen in my life. The heat from the house just whooshed out at us, we who were shivering in the freezing cold. 128 might as well be the code name for the dungeon for my sisters and me. Although our time there was also speckled with good memories. My oldest sister, Diane, had remained in South Carolina with my grandparents. She was growing up in segregated schools where the education was substandard, and dark-skinned students were frequently beaten with switches until they were bloody simply for refusing to be born high yellow or red bone. 2 years after we moved to Central Falls, my mom and dad finally said, we got to raise our own kids, and saved enough money to move my sister Diane and my brother, John, to Central Falls with us. Diane was 9 when she entered Broad Street School, the same school where I was in kindergarten. It went from kindergarten to 6th grade. Mama took her to enroll in 4th grade. After testing, her reading and math skills were marked so substandard she couldn't be placed in the 4th grade. Mr. Fortin, the 4th grade teacher, who always wore a nice suit and black-rimmed glasses and slicked back his hair. Said the school would keep her in the 3rd grade. Diane remembers saying to Mr. Fortin, "If you work with me every day after school, I promise I'll show you I can be in 4th grade." Mr. Fortin said, "I'll do it," and he kept his word. Every day after school she stayed, and he would sit right there with her. Diane told us, "Because I'm the oldest, everything that I learn, I'll teach you guys when I get home so you'll be ahead." We bought a second-hand school desk from the St. Vincent de Paul. The chair was attached to the desk and had little beams on it. They really bought it for me. I would sit in it while Diane taught us what she learned in school. I was mischievous in the crappiest way in school because I was bored. I'd say, "I already know this. My sister Diane already taught me the multiplication tables." Bored, I wanted to have a conversation. I wanted to play. "I already know how to write in cursive. My sister Diane taught me." Diane had another gift. She was a fantastic storyteller, like our dad, and could transport you to another reality simply with the power of her words. We would all sit down and clap. "Diane, tell us a story. Tell us a story." She would stand in front of us and captivate us. A lot of her stories were anecdotes about her life down south, what that was like. Others were fables she made up, similar to ones told down south. Fables of haints, witches, and old folklore. We totally believed. The story I remember her telling us the most was, one night, we heard something in the woods behind Ma Grandmama's house. Diane started. We all were sitting on the floor in the kitchen at 128. She would always stand. I could hear it in the trees. I went out there to see what it was because everyone was scared. It was so dark, you couldn't see your hands in front of your face. I didn't even know what was in the woods. That part always scared me. I heard a knocking and looked up, down, and saw drops of blood everywhere. I went farther and saw Uncle Arnold. Uncle Arnold was our closest uncle. His legs were way over there. His arms were even farther away. His body was in the middle and his head was not even attached to his neck. I was in shock. I started screaming and then put my hands on my hips and looked at his head and I said, "Arnold, pull yourself together." When we heard the punchline, we would fall out laughing our asses off. I would always scream, "Again, Diane, tell it again." When I met Diane for the first time, it was a rare occasion when we had hot water. I was maybe 5 years old. Diane was 9 when she walked into our lives in Central Falls. I remember her so clearly. She wore a nice coat. She had money. She smelled nice. I was taking a bath and allegedly fussing about getting dressed when I heard Diane say, "Where's my baby sister?" She came into the bathroom. I looked at her and she stared at me. It was love in my child brain. Part of the love was her offer to buy me candy from Gabe's store. As an adult, though, I recognized there was something more important that made me love her. She looked around at the disheveled apartment. "Viola, you don't want to live like this when you get older, do you?" she asked in a whisper. She didn't want my mom to hear. "No, Diane. You need to have a really clear idea of how you're going to make it out if you don't want to be poor for the rest of your life. You have to decide what you want to be. Then you have to work really hard," she whispered. I remember thinking, I just want candy. I couldn't understand the abstract. I was too young, but something I didn't have the words for, yet could feel, shifted inside me. What do I want to be? The first seed had been planted. Was there a way out? Achieving, becoming somebody, became my idea of being alive. I felt that achievement could detox the bad shit. It would detox the poverty. It would detox the fact that I felt less than. Being the only black family in Central Falls, I could be reborn a successful person. I wanted to achieve more than what my mother had. From age 5, because of Diane, recreation and reinvention and redefinition became my mission. Although I could not have articulated it, she simply was my supernatural ally. Much later, after college, Juilliard, Broadway stages. After first being nominated for awards, Emmy, Oscar, Tony, I could finally actually articulate what that big moment was. Prompted by my sister that day. It was the catalyst or agent that provoked a larger question. Aren't I somebody now? What do I have to do to be worthy? That moment, that revelation, was the true beginning to my call to adventure. Chapter 4, 128. He who has a why to live for can bear with almost any how. Friedrich Nietzsche. When I was 6, my 3 older sisters, my brother, although my brother was almost never around, and I loved going to school. School was our haven. It was right next door and we were big on school, especially my sister Diane. She absolutely loved school. She never wanted to miss a day. It was the dead of winter and we had no heat. Next, the electricity was cut off, and then we had no phone. It just kept escalating. When you have no heat, no gas, you have no hot water. It was sub-zero weather, freezing, absolutely freezing, and the pipes froze, so there was no running water. We couldn't even flush the toilet. To make matters worse, we were all extreme bedwetters. Not going to school was unheard of for us, but that day we all stayed home. I remember sitting in the living room all day in sub-zero weather, all huddled together, pissy, freezing, watching my mom. Mama was lost, just lost, didn't know what to do. No running water, pipes frozen, no heat, no phone. We clutched together, all shivering, and somewhere around midday my sister Diane stood up and announced, "I'm going to school." She spat on her hand, she wiped all the mucus out of her eyes, and she asked, "How do I look?" Mama said, "You look good, Ma," using her southern term. "You look beautiful, Ma." "Okay, all right, I'm going to school." And she went. The rest of us were still there shivering when Mama finally said, "We're going to have to go and try to get some heat assistance." We layered on every item of clothing we could find. Even on the best days, we never had the right size shoes or clothes. A lot of times, we couldn't even find socks. We almost never had clothes that were new. Every once in a while, we would go to Zayre's, a clothing store like J.C. Penney back in the day, and get something on layaway. For the most part, we went to St. Vincent de Paul. We loved going there because it was an adventure sorting through everybody else's used stuff. Everything seemed to have a story. Books, old toys, roller skates, skippies, sneakers, even fur coats and furniture. That frigid day, we put on whatever we had and started out into the cold. The heating assistants' offices were in downtown Pawtucket, one town over. Mom, Dolores, Anita, and I walked in freezing, sub-zero weather. I was still the youngest at that time, and I would cry in a minute. I was a total crybaby. As we started walking, I howled in tears. When we walked by the school on our way, the principal of the school, Mrs. Prosser, saw us. She was a great woman, tall and thin, with bright red hair. She always looked so regal to me and was both powerful and kind. She saw me. Mrs. Prosser would call me to her office, and whenever she did, I would think, "Oh my God, what did I do?" Because I was really a troublemaker. Even when I hadn't done anything wrong, I would wait for the shoe to drop. But often she would call me to her office and shower me with bags of hand-me-downs that belonged to her daughter. Really cute clothes and little purses. I would wear them to school and just stand in the schoolyard during recess and pose in the clothes she had gifted me as if to say, "Look at me." It was like I was demanding or begging for attention, positive attention, not wanting anyone to touch my perfectly put together outfit. Mrs. Prosser knew our situation. When she saw us, she yelled from the window, "Mrs. Davis, Mrs. Davis." Mama stopped. We were huddled together, shivering when the principal ran out. She was so desperate to get to us that Mrs. Prosser didn't even have a coat on. "Mrs. Davis, your kids aren't in school. What's going on? We don't have no heat, no electricity. We ain't got nothing. And the pipes froze. There's no running water. They can't even wash up. We can't do nothing. Oh, Mrs. Davis, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at us and she touched my face. "I'm so sorry. I wish there was something we could do. We're going to downtown Pawtucket to see if I can get someone to help us to pay the bills." "Okay, well, just let us know if there's anything we can do. I'm so sorry. I just wanted to know why your kids weren't in school." That period of my life was filled with shame. The feeling you get in the pit of your stomach when you have stage fright or humiliation. That was the shame of 128. Shame completely eviscerates you, destroys any sense of pride you may have in yourself. One day in class I had to use the bathroom real bad and I just kept my hand raised, but the teacher never acknowledged me. I couldn't hold it anymore, so I peed in my seat. It dripped on the floor and flooded my seat. My teacher got me a dry pair of pants from the nurse's office, put my wet clothes in a paper bag, and sent me home. But the most humiliating part of this was coming back the next day to find my desk in a back corner of the classroom with the same big puddle of urine still in my seat. It stayed there until it slowly dried up. What? My 6-year-old piss was too disgusting for even the janitor to clean. I was embarrassed a lot, and 128 only heightened that sense of humiliation. Our apartment building caught fire so many times. The first time it caught fire, I was in 1st grade. All the kids in school peered out their classroom windows at the red fire truck in front of the building right next door to school. We watched firefighters reel out the hose pipe and spray streams of water in the building, smoke billowing out. I heard an orchestra of voices. Oh my God, there's a fire. Who lives there? That's Viola's house. The teacher, Ms. Picard, stared at me. Viola, is that your house? I'm in my schoolroom with my 1st grade classmates, who already looked down at me for being black, now looking out at my home burning. Yeah, I answered, watching as firefighters ran inside of my building with hoses. I did not know if it was our apartment that caught fire. It was a perfect metaphor for the devastation I felt in my heart, because the source of my deepest shame was now a source of horrified entertainment for people who had exiled me from the day they met me. When I went home that day, the entire apartment was in disarray. It was our apartment that had caught fire. The fire damage was extensive, but the water damage was worse. The very water that the firefighters had sprayed into our house to save it also destroyed it. The linoleum was warped, bloated and curved like waves across the floor. Looking at the remains of our apartment, I thought not even the firefighters had respect for the place we called home. I knew it was shit, but it was my shit. It was my home. So many of the fires were uneventful. I was awakened in the middle of the night, led down a dark and smoky stairway, and stood for a long time, sleepy, with my hair wrapped up. The source of the fire would be found and order was restored, so we went upstairs and back to bed. Then there were times when Millie, our next door neighbor, would come banging on the door. Dan, get your kids out of the house. The house is on fire. Millie was black and she had a daughter named Kim and a son, Reggie, who had been in Vietnam. Kim was a fast friend. She and my sister Anita were especially close, until they weren't. Millie was one of those cigarette-smoking, hardcore, cuss you out in a minute, light-skinned black women. She was also the town crier. Dan, get your kids out. This fucking house is on fire. You can't go down the stairs, there's too much smoke. My father yelled and woke us all up. Black smoke was coming up the stairs and we were all on the 3rd floor. Y'all go to the fire escape. My father pushed us to the porch and everyone frantically started climbing down. Now, we were all experienced fire escape climbers. We were experienced climbers in general. We climbed the fire escape when we were locked out of the house. We climbed fences to pick apples, peaches, and pears from neighbors' yards without permission. But climbing under duress when you are convinced you're going to die is a different story. Well, the fire trucks were there and the firefighters had already taken their hoses out. People lined the street, just looking and gasping. My family jumped off the fire escape one after another like the Incredibles. Only one lone family member was left behind on the last landing. Me. I just stood there crying my eyes out. Mama, my mom, Dad, and siblings were all screaming, Viola, jump, just jump. My mom was in an absolute panic. She started crying hysterically. Baby, jump to your mama. I squatted down with my arms outstretched trying to reach her because I was terrified to jump. It was just too high. I imagined flames behind me, ready to engulf me at any minute, like Dumbo when he had to jump off that wire. But I just didn't have those big ears that could help me fly. But, as sure as I'm black, I saw my mom fly. She took about 5 big steps back, ran, and just at the right moment, leapt in the air like Michael Jordan, grabbed my arm, and pulled me down. We both fell on the concrete together. She screamed in pain. My father picked her up and we just held onto each other, tight. My sisters just slapped me on the head. Stupid, you should have jumped. It wasn't that high. Mom almost got hurt. I just watched my mom limping and saw my sisters and brother looking shell-shocked, lost, waiting for the fire department to clear us to go back into that hellhole. It was just a roof over our heads. Nothing about it was home. The truth is no one cares. No one looking at the fire was aware of my little dumb show, and there were no flames. We stayed at 128 for another 2 years. And yes, it remained a fire trap. But in my mind, no one cares about the conditions in which the unwanted live. You're invisible. A blame factor that allows the more advantage to be let off the hook from your misery. At 128, the fires simply got more frequent. The rats multiplied. The first landing stairway had holes leading straight to the basement. A family of 8 kidnapped children and 2 female guardians moved in on the second floor, and many bloodied fights, scars, and stitches were a part of our day-to-day life. Still, in the midst of the life shitstorm, there was one teeny, tiny light. A guide, a whisper, a voice. That one question from my Diane. What do you want to be? Chapter 5. Minefield. Ya honor. These kids been messin' with my children for a long time now. I had to do something. Me Viola Davis. 128 continued to deteriorate. People continued to move in. It wasn't until our last few months there that we were the only ones left in that death trap. But, at this point, in came the Thompsons. You know, when you're poor, you live in an alternate reality. It's not that we have problems different from everyone else, but we don't have the resources to mask them. We've been stripped clean of social protocol. There's an understanding that everyone is trying to survive, and who is going to get in the way of that? The Thompsons were a perfect example. They were a family of 8 kids, mostly girls. Their parents or guardians were 2 women we called bullfrogs. Why? They wore glasses that made their eyes bulge out, and they both had underbites. They had these huge bottom teeth that came over their top lip. They were also meaner than mean. They would always scream at the kids and beat the shit out of them. Once again, no one cared. My father would beat us and beat the hell out of my mom, so we were in the same company. But the kids, who were all around our age or older, were especially violent. The boys would start fires in the basement. The girls waited in a group for one of us to come out of school to terrorize us. We all went to different schools at the time, so we all arrived home alone. If I saw them lurking in the yard, I simply would hide out until they went inside. The bullfrogs would carry a belt around and herd them inside like animals. We would hear their screams from outside. One day, getting out of school, they saw me from yards away. The 2 boys whispered to each other and pointed. They got on their bikes and started pedaling fast toward me, and I ran. They caught up real fast. I was 7 and so terrified I couldn't speak. I ran and screamed. I knew they planned to run over me. As soon as they got uber close and it was obvious I wasn't going to outrun them, I screamed. They had me cornered. I lost it. I grabbed the front wheel of one of their bikes and started screaming and going crazy. I lifted the bike off the ground and just pulled, trying everything in my power to shake this bastard off his bike. Stop, stop. He and his brother were screaming. Leave me the fuck alone or I'll kill you. I shouted like a madwoman. They finally turned back around and left me alone, plotting for their next torturous shenanigans. And there would be many. My sister Anita smashed a brick on a car and made herself drool to get the 5 girls off her one day. She literally acted crazy, a technique my father taught her. Dolores was slapped a couple of times by them. One day, my mom was done. 4 Thompson's girls were blocking my sister Dolores's path to get inside the apartment building. They finally hit her and she ran upstairs. My mom went into an alternate reality. In other words, she lost her mind. She came running down the stairs to the door of the building. I ran behind her. I absolutely loved to witness any kind of fight outside of our apartment. It was better than primetime television. My mom raised her fist. Y'all need to stop messing with my children. You understand me? Keep it up and I'll beat yo ass myself. I was beyond impressed. My mom turned around after she made her point to come back upstairs. I looked at them as if to say, my mama told you. Well, as my mom turned to walk up, the meanest of the mean girls, Lisa, said, you bald-headed black bitch. The best comparison I can make to what happened next is that boulder coming after Indiana Jones in Raiders of the Lost Ark. If he didn't run, it most definitely would have flattened his ass. Well, my mom was that boulder. She leapt down the one flight of stairs she was on and said, what did you call me? But it really wasn't a question because she proceeded to slap Lisa so hard her entire body raised up off the ground and she fell flat on the dirty floor of our apartment building entryway. Her sisters were frozen. She didn't stop there. While Lisa was on the ground, my mom pointed her finger and finished her historic cuss out. don't you ever call me any names. I'll slap the piss out of you again. You understand me? And leave my children alone." She turned around and walked up the remaining stairs to our apartment, cussing the whole time. "Come on, Vala." I was impressed and looked back at Lisa crying on the ground. "That's right, my mom beat yo ass." Then all hell broke loose. The bullfrogs were informed and decided to press charges. We were all terrified. We were sure my mom would go to jail. Words were exchanged. There was a lot of back and forth, cussing, fists raised. The strangest part of all of it was that the bullfrog family would disappear for weeks, even months at a time, and then suddenly appear in their car and stay for a while before disappearing again. And one of them always had a wad of cash in an apron pocket. Every day my dad would pace back and forth and chain smoke. "You done it now, me Alice? Oh man, the judge may send you to jail or give you a fine." My mom would only say, "I'm gonna tell the man the truth." She was still hot, still mad. The day came when my mom finally went to court. My dad went with her. It's funny that there were moments within all the fighting, horrific abuse, and alcoholism that they had real moments as a united front. A team, but also in the presence of authority. My dad took the passive back seat and my mom dominated. My dad prepared my mama, me Alice. Whatever the judge say, you listen to. Don't say nothing. Don't talk back. Don't do nothing. I've been through this, me Alice. I know, he whispered nervously. Dan, I know how to talk. But me Alice, you gotta say yes, your honor. No, your honor. I'm telling you. He should have kept talking to her. Because apparently when the judge called on them, my mom went off. Your honor, these motherfucking kids keep messing with my children. Every time my children come home from school, they outside blocking their way in. Hitting them, trying to beat them up. I got tired of it. And yeah, I slapped the shit out of her cause she called me a bald-headed black bitch. And yeah, I call they so-called parents bullfrogs cause that's what they are. They egging they kids on. My dad kept tugging my mom's arm, saying softly, "Me Alice, you can't say that." "Dan, stop tugging on my arm. I'm trying to talk to the man. I'm telling him the truth about these common bastards." The judge interrupted her. "But Mrs. Davis, you cannot hit other people's children. It's illegal. Your honor, I'm trying to tell you, I had enough. There's something wrong with those people. I had to protect my children." My father kept trying to both shush her and show his exasperation. "Me Alice, sit down. Be quiet. Me Alice. Dan, stop trying to shush me. I'm trying to tell the man what the situation is." As unlikely as it may seem, the judge understood. Mama was and always has been a charmer, even when she's out of control. He let her go, and for the next several weeks, epic jabs were traded between our families. From our third-floor porch, we would see them across the street in a parking lot. The two bullfrogs would shout, "You do it again. You see what you get. I ain't gonna get nothing. But I'll slap the piss out of them again if they call me a bald-headed black bitch." My mom yelled back, laughing. I knocked her little ass down. "Don't you touch my kids," the bullfrogs responded. They'd yell and yell, trading jabs. It built up resentment and made us more afraid to be cornered outside. However, something else was happening. As the adults were yelling, the kids, all of us, were subdued. It's as if we were saying it was too much. They knew that they had crossed the line and we just wanted it to stop. But the vitriol of our protectors was overriding our renewed feelings of wanting to, dare I say, bond. Be friends. The catalyst of friendship would come days later. We were in the backyard playing softball. The Thompson kids suddenly came out and Lisa picked up the bat. She started circling the yard ominously. The others were behind her silently egging her on. My sister Dolores ran upstairs to get my parents. Only, my dad came downstairs. The closer, the big dog, the one who cannot be named. Lord Voldemort, the HNIC. There was no stopping him and there was no build-up. He came out like a Category 5 storm. He grabbed the baseball bat. "Stop this motherfucking shit right now. You want to mess with me, motherfuckers." He began waving the bat at them, beating the side of the house, the ground, the air. I believe even the bullfrogs came out. "Come at me, you bullfrog motherfuckers. Mess with my kids one more time and I'll beat all you motherfuckers. You hear me?" Then he dropped the bat and went inside the house. There was dead silence. No one moved. My father, when he got mad, was a man of his word. He would keep various toys by his bed throughout our childhood. A pitchfork, a machete, an axe, and he used every last one of them. He chased Porky with the pitchfork. Porky was one of his friends who was about 5 feet tall, dressed like Elvis, and had a car with no backs to the seats. It was just a bunch of tattered foam. He came to the house demanding money for fixing my dad's car. My dad showed him the pitchfork instead. I've never seen a man run with so much terror. My dad chased him by foot with his pitchfork and Porky was in his car. Dad came back home, started boiling a pot of water, and sat by the window waiting for him to come back. As for the axe and the machete, well, those events would come much later. Dad's confrontation with the Thompsons and the baseball bat was effective. After that, believe it or not, we became friends. Good friends. There were smiles, protectiveness, laughs. We were all just figuring out how to love and connect. We were just ensnared in the trap of abuse. The constantly being beaten down so much makes you begin to feel that you're wrong. Not that you did wrong, but you were wrong. It makes you so angry at your abuser, the one that you're too afraid to confront. So you confront the easiest target, those you can, until your heart gets tired. No one ever, up until that point, talked to us, asked us what our dreams were, asked us how we were feeling. It was on us to figure it out. There is an emotional abandonment that comes with poverty and being black. The weight of generational trauma and having to fight for your basic needs doesn't leave room for anything else. You just believe you're the leftovers. Many years later, my mom saw Lisa, the meanest of the mean ones, and Lisa apologized. She told my mom, Mrs. Davis, "I'm so sorry for how I acted back in the day, but I missed my mom. They had taken me from her. They took all of us and were committing welfare fraud. That's why we had 2 different homes. All those girls were not my sisters, and the boys weren't my brothers. Plus, those women were sexually and physically abusing us. They even accused you of burning John's arm. We all knew that was a lie. I'm sorry, Mrs. Davis." Then came James, Bobby, and Frank. They were my best friends next door. They had a mom and dad who called them in for dinner and lunch. Their father, Tommy, even built them a little partitioned play area behind the house. They were rough and tumble boys, but kind, funny, and I felt, well, that I had some power over them. They'd listen to me. I was 9 or 10 at the time, but the wise seer who would bring information from my older brother and sisters. Tommy was a man with a temper. The boy's mother had cerebral palsy and the father constantly abused her. I didn't know it at first because I was too busy admiring the fact that they had food and dinner time, and a nice apartment. Also, I was too busy sanitizing the character flaws of people in general. There was just a basic understanding that they were better. They were victims of unfortunate circumstances and needed love and healing. I, however, was just born bad. Everyone knew that Tommy abused his wife. The worst part of it is, my sisters and I found him sneaking out of his apartment around 9 p.m. at night to fool around with his next-door neighbor, Rhonda. We would see it because we always pushed our curfew by a few minutes and started snooping around like Sherlock Holmes. We all wanted to be secret detectives and, voila, we uncovered the best-kept secret. Tommy and Rhonda would sit on the stairway leading to her apartment and hold hands and kiss. We would watch, hidden, and then at an opportune time would jump out and scream, "Cheater." It pissed him off so bad. He would chase after us. Now, we also had the world's best pet at that time, our dog, Coley. Coley was a collie. My father brought him for us from the racetrack. He was a trained dog, very smart, and he absolutely loved us. He was so loyal that my mom took him to City Hall with her one day. She finished her business but went out the back door instead of the front door where she came in. She kept calling Coley and wondered where he was. He was gone. She was in a panic, so we all combed the city. We found him hours later at the front door of City Hall where my mom went in. He was whimpering and still waiting for her to come out. One day, I got the epic idea of seeing the ghost of a girl who had died at Cogswell Tower. Cogswell Tower was in Jenks Park, our favorite after Washington Street Park closed down. During the summer we were involved in recreational competitions. At night, Cogswell Tower was as ominous as they come. It looked like a tower of terror. I had heard a very blurry story of a girl who committed suicide there. she morphed into an unsettled spirit whose only purpose was to roam the tower minaciously. I told James, Bobby, and Frank the story. Like always, I had their attention and they were as fascinated as me. That night, I told them that I would help them sneak out of their apartment and we would walk to the park. Well, as soon as it got dark, around 8:30 p.m. or so, I went to their first floor apartment and knocked on their bedroom window. I slowly helped all of them climb out. We were pumped, but scared and tired. We're going to see a ghost, but soon as we see her, we should run, I instructed my crew. We started off walking toward the park. James, the youngest, was absolutely exhausted and I could tell that all they wanted was to go back home. We were in over our heads. Bobby, James, Frank, a booming voice shouted behind us. Holy shit, it was their father. He was carrying a belt and running. He started whipping them. What the hell do you think you're doing? Get back home. What are you doing with my kids? His last shouted words were directed at me. I said, they wanted to come. You can't play with them anymore. Find some other friends. They walked off, the boys wailing and crying. I felt like shit and was a little jealous that their father came running out with a belt to find them. No one came running looking for me. The next day Tommy, livid, approached my father and told him what happened. He ranted. He screamed, she's a bad influence on my kids. I don't want her around them. My father kept saying it was a mistake. But Tommy started directing his anger at my dad for not controlling me. He was inches away from my dad. It occurred to me that these were two men who had similar anger issues. Finally, my dad grabbed his neck. You white motherfucker. Don't ever get in my face talking about my children being a bad influence. You messing around on your wife, and yo kids are just as bad. He was choking him. Then he just pushed him away and told him to never get in his face again. Tommy walked off gasping for air, terrified and humiliated. The next day, Coley got real sick. He stopped eating and drinking water. He had foam around his mouth and matter in his eyes. Our friends, the Wainers, lived up the street and their father was what we called a dog catcher. He basically worked at an animal shelter. He came over and determined that Coley had been given rat poisoning. There was nothing we could do but put him to sleep. He was in so much pain that dementia had set in. The last time we saw him, we all said goodbye. He was in the kitchen and was wagging his tail. He loved us so much. I clutched my mom hysterically. We were devastated. The loss of any pet is hard, but it's especially hard when they serve a larger purpose that is fulfilling the deficit of loyalty and love. Tommy poisoned the dog, or at least, that's what my father suspected. He said he saw Tommy in the yard. Central Falls was my home, but it was also a minefield. It was a small town where you were constantly trying to dodge little and big explosions that could level you while trying to occupy space in it to be somebody. It was an emotional war zone made worse by the war zone at home. I didn't know what boundaries were. I was constantly doing messed up shit to be seen. Exercising any semblance of power and authority, I had to feel alive. I wanted to squeeze out any level of joy and laughs I could. But the worst part is, deep inside there was a demon, and another part of me that was wrestling with the alive me. She, the demon, kept whispering, "You're not good." But the other part, the fighter, the survivor, screamed back a resounding, "No." Chapter 6, My Calling. It was like a hand reached for mine and I finally saw my way out. Our television set at 128 did not work, but it had another television set that did work sitting on it. One that relied on an aluminum foil-wrapped antenna, connected to an extension cord from one of the few working outlets. The TV sat in the next-door apartment. One evening while watching TV, a new world opened up before my very eyes. A woman who looked just like Mama came on television one night, and something magical happened. Suddenly, I saw her. It was Miss Cicely Tyson in the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman. She had a long neck and was beautiful, dark-skinned, glistening with sweat, high cheekbones, thick, full lips, and a clean, short afro. My heart stopped beating. The shame, pain, fear, confusion, all these negative feelings I had about my life and my situation were blasted through a brand new doorway. It was like a hand reached for mine and I finally saw my way out. The beauty of that moment was that my sisters saw an exit too. I experienced the true power of artistry. At that moment, I found my calling. How Miss Tyson transformed from 18 to 110 years old was supernatural. I wanted to be supernatural. I wanted my life to mean something. And this was it. I finally found it. It wasn't long after I had my first performance, a skit with my sisters in a contest at Jenks Park, sponsored by the Central Falls Parks and Recreation Department. It was a big deal. The whole city was buzzing. All the white kids who went to Teresa Landry's School of Dance for tap dance, acrobatic lessons, and so forth, some of whom very freely called us nigger, nigger, nigger all the time, were favored to win. But anybody in Central Falls could create a skit, and whoever won got a profile in the paper and a prize. My sisters and I decided we were going to win that damn contest. Diane, being the academic high achiever and oldest sister, took the lead and told us, "I studied this. We need a producer. We need a director. We need a writer. We need actors. And we need a wardrobe budget." Diane became the producer. I was a writer, actor, and Anita was an actor as well. Dolores was a bit of everything and took on director, actor, and co-producer. We decided to create our own original skit called The Lifesaver Show based on Monty Hall's Let's Make a Deal. My mama was addicted to game shows. In our game show, contestants would come on and share their story about saving another person's life. Whoever had the best life-saving story would win the contest. Dolores played a Monty Hall type talk show host character. I played the Ooey Kid. That's Ted Lange from the television show That's My Mama. Diane was Fred Sanford from Sanford and Son. Anita was Aunt Esther from the same show. We wrote our skit over the span of 2.5 weeks, and we started early. We had a wardrobe budget of $2.50 that we put together by finding loose change. And for things we couldn't afford to buy, we raided my mom and dad's closet. They said, "You can take whatever is in our closet and use it." We took the fur coat she got from St. Vincent de Paul, her straw purse, hat, wig. We got a suit of my father's, which Dolores and Diane wore, although it was totally oversized. The rest we bought from St. Vincent de Paul with the $2.50. Our rehearsals were intense. We approached the skit like it was Shakespeare. If a line didn't work, Diane would stop the rehearsal and tell me it isn't landing. Then, I would go into the closet to focus and come up with something better. To put it in context, this closet was filled with junk and rats, but I braved it for rewrites. Finally, the day came. We had researched the skit to an inch of our lives. I had massive stage fright. Massive. I could barely perform in private with my sisters. My throat would constrict. My stomach would be in knots. I would just freeze. But my sisters threatened me not to flake out or else. That's how important this was. It seemed like the entirety of Central Falls was gathered in Jenks Park that day. Reporters and photographers from the Pawtucket Times were there. Kids and their parents were sitting on the grass and on the huge rock that was smack dab in the middle of the park. Some spectators even brought folding chairs. When it finally started, and the group of kids who were favored to win were introduced, the whole park screamed in excitement. When they finished, it was to thunderous applause, with the knowledge that they had found their winning group. I remember my sisters and I looking at one another, pumping each other with confidence. And then they all sat back down and Diane said, "Okay, you know we got to do it like we practiced. We're up." We did our little chant, which consisted of "We're gonna win. We're gonna win." Diane looked at me and saw my fear. "We're not freezing today, Viola, right?" I nodded reluctantly. The butterflies in my stomach were overwhelming, but so was the desire to not destroy what we created. When they introduced us, there was clapping but nothing near the ovation for the previous group. That group stood near the stage with their arms crossed. We were the last group of the day. We started off by all singing our own rendition of the jingle from The Tonight Show. Dolores came on first and said, "Welcome everybody to the Lifesaver Show. I'm your host, Monty Hall, and I'm here to tell you that we have a show where everyone is asked to share your life-saving stories. We've got the ultimate $1 million prize for each of you." Wait a minute. There was an interruption. The interruption was me. I came on as the Ooey Kid and mimicked Ted Lange, the town gossip, as best as I could. "Ooey, I got it. I'm here to report it." Then 9-year-old me said, "Fred Sanford is coming on the show. He's coming on the show, and he's about to mess things up. You've got to watch out for him." Diane as Fred Sanford came on and shared his story that he saved a bunch of lives when he saw a group of people fall off a bridge and jumped into the water to rescue them. Anita as Aunt Esther came out and Fred said, "Aunt Esther, I should put your face in some dough and make some gorilla cookies." And he and Aunt Esther started fighting the way they did on the TV show. Fred finally ends his life-saving story by saying, "I jumped into the water to save Aunt Esther." Aunt Esther, played by Anita, was so moved she said, "You went in to save me, Fred?" To which he replied, "No, I went in to save the fish because you're so damn ugly." They began to fight even more, and Fred tore off Aunt Esther's wig, revealing her bald head underneath. The skit ended with a standing ovation. But nostalgia is powerful. The memory of the winning, the applause, the acceptance is my takeaway. But my lack of self-love and my complete inability to open up to anyone about my one driving fear. My father is going to beat my mom to death one day. Couldn't be voiced. The adoration is as powerful as that curtain was in The Wizard of Oz. It hid a lie that gave me temporary asylum. That's what winning was. An instant protection and smoke screen to hide the fact that I was simply scared all the time. I felt like an outsider all the time. We won. We got first place, and I'll never forget the faces of the chosen girls from Teresa Landry's School of Dance when they watched us do our happy dance. 2. We won. We won. Some gift certificates, maybe to McDonald's or a place like that, is all I think we won. Along with a softball set. One of those plastic sets with the softball and a hard, plastic, red bat. We weren't interested in the softball set. We just wanted to win. We wanted to be somebody. We wanted to be somebody. Chapter 7. The Sisterhood. A happy family is but an earlier heaven. George Bernard Shaw. My sisters became my platoon. We were all in a war, fighting for significance. Each of us was a soldier fighting for our value, our worth. We were all in it together. We all needed one another. None of us could fight individually. I know I didn't have enough strength. We were fighting a war with seen and unseen enemies. Regardless, our commitment was to the whole. It was a together or nothing ethos. Eventually, we would separate and some would be left on the battleground intact but missing something. But, as children, we were in it together. Diane, the oldest, Anita, 1 year behind her, Dolores, 2 years younger, and me, 3 years her junior. We all wanted out and our bonds of sisterhood helped make a way. Diane was the brains, Anita the brawn, Dolores was the mastermind. Me, I was the one who could either drag the whole team down or up miraculously in the final hour. We were transformed by Miss Tyson. Then, winning the drama skit contest shifted our lives because our sister platoon had seen a physical manifestation of winning our war. The bat from the softball set, the red bat we won, became the rat catcher, a tool in our arsenal. Rats always come out of nowhere. You could be sitting in front of the TV, watching your show, and all of a sudden, a rat jumps on the couch, or one comes scurrying out of a hole in the wall, and in a flash is underneath the couch. Whenever we saw a rat, we told Anita, "I saw a rat." Once she saw the rat, she got the prize we won. That red bat, out. We would all stand behind her, clutching her. Diane said, "It went under. It went under there. Get it, get it, get it." We were all really quiet, waiting for it to slow down. We saw its tail, visible under the couch. Anita waited. She, who, by the way, became an all-star softball player, timed it perfectly. Bam! She actually knocked the tail off the rat. She didn't kill the rat. She just knocked its tail off. The prize bat came in handy again when Mama was napping in her bedroom, her mouth open, in the middle of the day one weekend. Unafraid of our black cat boots, the biggest freaking rat we had ever seen was on her pillowcase, slowly inching toward her. We snuck out and told Anita, "There's a rat. It's about to kill Mom, bite Mama's neck." Anita got the bat and once again, we were behind her, holding on to her, as the rat stealthily inched toward Mama's open mouth. Why we just didn't yell, "Mama, wake up," to make the rat jump off the bed and run, I don't know. Boots leapt onto the pillow, viciously meowed, and the rat darted into the closet and hid among the crowded clothes. Mama awoke startled. The rat is somewhere in the middle of the clothes. We screamed. Was it in between the coats or hidden in the dresses? We were trying to figure it out. peeking to see its tail from behind Anita, who wielded the red bat. "I think it's right here," she said. "Make sure you get it, Anita, because he's somewhere in the middle of these clothes," we chimed. Anita aimed perfectly. She timed it, just like she later hit softballs, and as hard as she could, she brought that red bat down and flattened the rat like a pancake. The great memory of winning that contest, my acting debut, that started me on my journey toward becoming an actress, is accompanied by recollections of that red, plastic bat and its handiness as a rat killer. Rats are a huge part of that memory of winning. I'm terrified of rats to this day. Our growing up years were speckled with good moments. Happiness for me was Valentine's Day. My father knew how to celebrate Valentine's Day and other major holidays. He bought lots of chocolate, and believe it or not, for Easter he bought Easter eggs and gave us cards. Christmas, especially when we were younger, was festive and we would always put up a tree. Once I got to be about 11 or 12, there weren't many gifts, but still, we had a Christmas tree and my dad was the happy drunk when he would play his guitar. I was 7 or 8 when my dad got us a pool table. It was a full-size pool table. My dad bought it because he liked playing pool at the bar. I loved playing pool. After a while, that pool table was jacked up, and we never had another one. But sometimes we would go to the bar. Back in the day when parents could take kids to the bar and play darts and pool and be treated to Sprite and potato chips. These happy moments would soon be followed by trauma, the rage of my dad's alcoholic binges, violence, poverty, hunger, and isolation. In my child's mind, I was the problem. I would retreat to the bathroom, put something against the door so no one would come in, and I'd sit for an inordinate amount of time staring at my fingers and hands and try to erase everything in my mind. I wished I could elevate out of my body, leave it. One time, when I was about 9 years old, I succeeded. I left it. My body, that is, in a manner of speaking. I floated up to the ceiling, looking down at myself, observing my hair, my legs, and my face. Then I faced myself, staring directly into me. Wow, I loved it. It was a magical, secret power, only I didn't see myself as magical or powerful. I just felt free. It was my way of disappearing. It was my high. I couldn't always control this out-of-body sense, but when I could, it was beyond fabulous. The power to leave my body, to be relieved of Viola for a while, was an ever-present image that followed me for decades. I never liked how it ended, though. These out-of-body experiences would always seem to stop abruptly. I would come crashing down, like in movies where someone has telekinetic powers and would lift an item but couldn't concentrate anymore. So the item would come crashing down. I was out of my body and suddenly, back in it. I tried to compartmentalize, to dodge those heavy emotions, until I couldn't. The power was temporary. Even now, me and Dolores have dreams about 128. It created the backdrop for bonds of sisterhood. 128 was a womb of sisterhood. At night, we sisters would huddle on a top bunk for warmth, horrified at the sounds of rodents eating pigeons on the roof, eating our toys, squealing, when we felt the weight of their bodies as they jumped on our beds searching for something to eat. We would wrap bedsheets around our necks to protect ourselves from bites. Going to the bathroom at night in the midst of this was not an option. Cutting on the lights and watching them scurry was not an option because there were no lights in the part of the apartment where we slept. The bathroom was a faraway place on the other side of the apartment, but it may as well have been on the other side of the world. If you didn't go before bed, you could forget making that journey at night. So, we just peed. We dreamed away our problems. When Dad was drunk or there was turmoil, my sister Dolores and I would disappear into the bedroom and become Jaja and Joggy. Rich, white Beverly Hills matrons with big jewels and little chihuahuas. We would play this game for hours. "Umai, Jaja," Joggy would say, "I bought this fabulous house and my husband bought me this beautiful diamond ring." We played with such detail that it became transcendent. We played with the backdrop noise of our mom being beaten and screaming in pain. But we believed we were in that world, until eventually, Dolores would break the spell, saying, "You're not Jaja. You're poor. You're on welfare. You don't have diamonds." We'd fight and the game of pretend would be over, until the next time there was family tumult. It was how we escaped. We transformed into people we felt were better, people who existed in a world we only dreamed of, women who were not us. We played for fun and out of desperation. Jaja and Joggy were our pretend protection. The majority of my most joyful memories were from my relationship with my sisters. We dreamed together so fiercely. We started a band called the Hot Shots. We were trying to be the Jackson 5. We never wrote a song or played an instrument. We had no money to take lessons, but what we lacked in ability, we made up for in drive and imagination. Dolores was on drums. Diane was the lead singer. I played the tambourine and Anita was on guitar. We could pretend and escape into our imagination. We were fascinated by fireworks. One day we purchased firecrackers. Having the money to do so was a big deal. We bought them from one of the corner stores. For reasons I don't remember, we decided to light a firecracker in the kitchen of 128 and throw it out the window. I was in charge of holding the firecracker. I froze, or as they say in the vernacular, I nutted up. My sisters screamed at me to throw it, but I couldn't move. It exploded in my hands. My hands went numb completely. Visualize a Looney Tunes cartoon where I totally lose my hearing and smoke comes out my nose and ears. Like Wile E. Coyote, I stood with the exploded firecracker in my hand. My mouth gaped open. I saw my sisters mouthing the words, because I couldn't hear, Viola, are you okay? Stupid, I told you to throw it. Then my ass started to cry. I'm deaf. Oh my God. My hearing came back. My sisters and I continued to navigate our world. We continued to figure it out on our own in the absence of parents. Our parents were just trying to keep us alive the only way they knew how. They controlled what they could and injected ritual, joy, hope in little ways. For example, we were gifted new clothes at least once a year on Easter. Despite pissed beds, almost never having clean clothes, rats jumping on our bed at night, broken furniture, food insecurity, shoddy plumbing, no phone, we all got a brand new outfit. The potency and power of tradition is deep. My mom would break out the hot combs, a metal curling iron and straightening comb that she would put on the stovetop fire. With blue magic pomade, she would proceed to straighten and curl our hair for Easter. It was a sadistic ritual as I saw it. She would slap and yell at us, keep your ass still or I'll burn you, if we squirmed. When that hot straightening comb hit that greased piece of hair, sizzled, and fell on your ear or face, you had to squirm. Sometimes she'd get to talking and leave the comb and curling iron on the fire too long. Those hotter than hot irons would burn the hair black. Keep your ass still. In the end, we looked really cute in our maxi dresses and new shoes, but man, did we look greasy. We didn't care. We loved it. My parents gave us candy, some money, and we would stand in the yard waiting for anyone to pass by so they could see how cute we looked. Finally, Diane came up with the idea of going to church. She said that's what they did down south. The only churches in Central Falls were Catholic. We got up the courage to go since most people we knew in Central Falls were Catholic. We went into Holy Trinity Church and sat in the back. From the moment we stepped into the church, all eyes were on us. I thought everyone was mesmerized by how cute we looked. We pretended or tried to learn the songs in different responses. Then, prompted by Diane, we went up for communion. Just say amen after he puts the bread in your mouth. I was excited about getting the little piece of bread. When time came to take the bread of Christ, the priest leaned down and whispered, "Are you Catholic?" Diane, with her mouth still open, ready, shook her head truthfully, no. He motioned for us to leave. I then realized why we had been so closely observed. After that, we took our Easter money to Leroy Theater to watch a double feature and eat either hot dogs or large bags of M&Ms. 75 cents for a double feature and 35 cents for a big bag of M&Ms. The other holiday was Halloween. We would be the first ones out trick-or-treating and the last ones home. The goal was to get as much candy as we could. We would fill one bag and go out with another one. We never really had costumes, so we would just put my mom's makeup on our nose, forehead, cheeks, and that would be it. There was no money for anything else. One year we made it a point of going out before it got dark. We ran out with our pillowcases and paper bags. It was the best idea because we were the only kids out. We saw no one else, absolutely no one. We were going to get the best candy because we were the first. We knocked on our first door. It was a father and a mother with about 3 kids. We screamed, "Trick or treat." The man looked completely startled and burst out laughing. Halloween is tomorrow. You all came out on the wrong day. His wife and kids came to the door and proceeded to laugh hysterically at us. We ran away fast and didn't stop until we got home. Some battles we won, survived together and emerged with laughter and perspective, and some brutal ones. Sexual abuse. We lost. Sexual abuse back in the day didn't have a name. The abusers were called dirty old men and the abused were called fast or heifers. It was shrouded in silence and invisible trauma and shame. It is hard to process how pervasive it was. What made us sitting ducks was our lack of supervision and lack of knowledge. It was a different time. The abuse spanned from random old men on the street telling us, especially me because I was the youngest, how adorable we were. Then came, "I'll give you a quarter if you give me a kiss." I wanted the quarter. I would take it. Give the old man with a cane a kiss on the cheek. He would linger there, staring, waiting for something more. I would look around suspiciously until something in me told me to run. A birthday party at a friend's house was crowded with hard drinking, beer-swilling types. The house had a back porch that led onto the rooftop of their garage. It was a great space to play as kids, which is what we did that day. One of the men at the party would pretend to chase us between drinks. We would run and laugh. He chased us until he just about cornered us, but all the kids managed to duck, dodge around him. Except me. I froze and he grabbed me. All the kids were pointing, laughing at the fact I was caught. He grabbed and said, "You are so cute and pretty." Then he proceeded to lift my skirt, pull my underwear aside exposing my butt cheek, and begin to rub making sexual noises. The children screamed in horror and ran. I squirmed and punched my way out of his arms and ran. The other kids began to tease me. "Ha, ha, you got caught. That was nasty." I was absolutely devastated. Making matters worse and even more confusing, I was the one being humiliated, not the man who felt me up in front of everyone. I was just 8 but felt dirty, spoiled. Even more insidiously painful, I was ashamed at how I felt, not just what happened. Think about that for a minute. Ashamed at myself for feeling violated by a grown-ass, perverted violator. I was by myself at that party, alone, left to fend and navigate the shark-infested waters by myself. We were left with older boys, neighbors who would babysit us and unzip their pants while playing horsey with us. My 3 sisters and I were often left unsupervised with my brother in our apartment. Sexual curiosity would cross the line. He would chase us. We would lose. And eventually other inappropriate behavior occurred that had a profound effect. I compartmentalized much of this at the time. I stored it in a place in my psyche that felt safely hidden. By hiding it I could actually pretend it didn't happen. But it did. Once again more secrets. Layers upon layers of deep, dark ones. Trauma, shit, piss, and mortar mixed with memories that have been filtered, edited for survival, and entangled with generational secrets. Somewhere buried underneath all that waste lives me. The me fighting to breathe. The me wanting so badly to feel alive. But this is the journey. The only weapon I have to blast through it all is forgiveness. It's giving up all hope of a different past. My mom is now 78 and her memory is slowly starting to fade. As I watch her now, I am desperately trying to hold on to every bit of time we have left together. I'm trying to take all the secrets and barriers off the table. Any barriers we could possibly have between us. One day over some green tea and toast, we sat and talked about past memories and my childhood in Central Falls. As we talked, a knot in my stomach bubbled up and showed itself. It's that familiar feeling I get before I do something risky or uncomfortable. Like when I'm in social environments where I feel I don't fit in. But this particular time, I pushed forward anyway. I dug down deep. I harnessed my anger, my hurt, and I told her about a painful memory. Dolores, Anita, Diane, and I were sexually abused. I told her as I uttered my brother's name in that same breath. He chased us in the apartment. He was aggressive. We were scared. We were so young, Mom. There was penetration with Anita and Diane. Me and Dolores were touched. There was silence. She didn't move. It's ironic that she was sitting in my beautiful kitchen of marble and porcelain, with the sub-zero refrigerator and high ceilings. And it meant absolutely fucking nothing compared to the largeness of the truth of what was happening. Success pales in comparison to healing. Not just the truth of the abuse, but the decision to love, to forgive. what I knew the reaction would be, which was silence, silence, heavy silence, the silence that's steeped in shock, hurt, guilt, recognition of her own abuse, the silent desperation of trying to negotiate the complexity of being a mother. The only sign that something had shifted in her was her uneaten toast. There were other kinds of incidents we experienced as a sisterhood. We were trying to make sugar candy on the stove while my parents were out, either at the local bar, though my mom never drank, or my mom was at bingo and my dad at work. Sugar candy was a country tradition that my sister Diane taught us. You pour an insanely inappropriate amount of grease in an iron pan and pour enough sugar to give an entire school full of children diabetes in it and just stir over a high flame. It would caramelize. You then turn the heat off and let it cool and harden into sugar candy. We would try anything involving food. We were always hungry. One time we let the grease cook too long and it popped out and splattered all over Anita's face. She screamed. We screamed. Diane got a greasy rag and wiped. A layer of skin came off. She grabbed her coat and ran out to get my mom. Anita ended up in the emergency room and had big blisters on her face. Our silent competition about who wet the bed the most and who would end up stopping first. My brother playing Bruce Lee threw a butcher knife at my sister Anita. Miraculously, it missed her organs and embedded itself in her leg instead. My parents started fighting while my mom was doing Diane's hair. My father got so mad and out of control he threw a glass at my mom, which hit Diane in the head, splitting her head open. Blood gushed out. When I look back at what I've seen, my only thoughts are that it's amazing how much a human body can endure. There are not enough pages to mention the fights, the constantly being awakened in the middle of the night or coming home after school to my dad's rages and praying he wouldn't lose so much control that he would kill my mom. Sometimes her head or arm would be split open. She would have a swollen face, split lip. I was always afraid when he picked anything up like a piece of wood because he would hit her as hard as he could and keep beating. Sometimes all night. There were so many times that we would see droplets of blood leading to our apartment and we just knew what was happening. It was chaos, violence, anger, and poverty mixed with shame. One night, my father came home profoundly drunk. He kept saying, "Me Alice, I'm dying. I'm not gonna live past the night. Wake up the children." My mom, crying, woke us all up. We were exhausted and just sat in their room trying not to fall asleep. My dad was on the floor, wasted and periodically throwing up clear liquid. My mom was holding his head, crying. "Y'all, your daddy's dying," he moaned. "I ain't gonna be here much longer. I want to say bye to all of y'all." I started crying. I was the crybaby. My sisters were stoic. My dad began to say goodbye to each of us. "Dolores, you smart. You gon' do good, but you gotta stop stealing your sister's shit and selling it at school. Don't think I don't know what you're doing." Dolores then started crying. "A little. Diane, you take care of your sisters. Vala, you my baby. You know your daddy loves you. But yo ass need to stop pissing in the bed and stinking up the house. Nita, I don't know what the hell to do with you. You piss in the bed, steal, fight people." He convulsed, threw up, and went cold. Stopped moving. I wailed, "Daddy, no, don't die, Daddy." Then he woke right back up. "I love y'all." My mom looked at us and said, "Y'all go back to bed." There were continual battles. After every one of them there was a looming reality. How will we overcome this one? The only hope was that these ever-present battles would be little traumas, not a big trauma. In the early 70 seconds, my sister Anita came face to face with a big one. It started out as a normal, uneventful summer day, and my family and our next-door neighbors, the Owenses, were all sitting on the porch talking. Now, this was at 128. The Owenses had the apartment that we eventually would occupy once they moved out. They were a large family just like ours. We were very close and would just play together all the time. As the adults enjoyed the calm of the porch, we kids were running inside the house, periodically ducking our heads outside, while we young'uns frolicked without a care in the world. Mrs. Owens and my mom suddenly blurted, "Look at the monster. OMG, what is he doing?" Of course, we ran outside to see. "Look, he ran into the backyard," we exclaimed with excitement, absolutely unaware of where this seemingly innocent ride would later take us. As we ran to see the monster in the backyard, our parents screamed behind us, "Don't you go near that man." We saw him. A man in the middle of the backyard with no shoes on, jeans that were torn at the leg, and a shirt that was haphazardly buttoned. He just stood, rocking back and forth, and groaning. His eyes didn't register us at all, even though he was looking straight at us. Our parents weren't joking. If he wasn't a monster, he would certainly do until a real one came along. We screamed at him, "Look at us. Whoa, look, monster, we're here." We were terrified, but playing it off brilliantly, in our minds, with our rude taunts. Suddenly, a stray cat we had unofficially adopted came walking over to this man. We screamed, "Cat." We hadn't named the damn cat yet. "Cat, get away from him." We screamed at the top of our lungs, hoping to startle the cat enough for it to run away. We certainly didn't have the guts to run near the monster and get it. So, we just kept screaming at the cat and to the man not to pick up our kind of pet. Suddenly, the rocking entity that looked every bit the part of horror movie villain picked the cat up by the back of its neck. Our screams got louder. If he heard us, we couldn't tell because he didn't respond to us. Instead, he looked at the cat, stroked it almost lovingly, and then calmly broke its neck. Blood oozed out of the dead feline's mouth. Its head hung, although it seemed like it was still trying to live. The man held the bloody cat up, let its blood drip down his face, and licked it. He flung the cat down and smeared the blood on his face ritualistically, like war paint. We were absolutely still, not believing what we were seeing. Traumatized, suddenly, like a switch turned on, he finally registered us. His childish tormentors growled and charged at us full speed. We ran inside our apartment building like hunted animals, clawing over each other, scrambling, crying. We made it up the stairs. When we looked around, out of breath, crying, we discovered Anita wasn't there. We called the police. My dad ran around the city looking for her. We cried. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to us, Anita was being hunted. She later told us as we, her sisters and friends, ran to the apartment, she went in another direction. And soon, the monster saw her and began his hunt. Anita shared how she was running, hiding behind trees, the huge rock at Jenks Park. She tried being quiet to not give away her positions, but he was hunting her, as if he was in a war, and everywhere she hid served only as a temporary safe haven, until he again spotted her and continued the chase. While my sister was literally running for her life, we had no idea where she was. The cops came to our home, but they didn't know either. Then we saw her running down Washington Street from Jenks Park. She was out of breath, crying hysterically. She ran into the market across the street from our house, the bloodied monster right behind her. The butcher from the Columbian market came out with a machete and screamed, "You stop." Miraculously, this real-life Friday the 13th Jason stopped. Frozen, limp, he then put his head down as if someone took a battery out of him. We watched the cops put a straitjacket on him and put him on a gurney and into a padded wagon. We later found out that he had just come back from Vietnam, where he spent months in the woods eating all kinds of rodents and cats. His PTSD was so bad that his wife had thrown him out of the house that day. Anita was always the brawn in the family, the survivor, the fighter, but even some of the mightiest of warriors have wounds that leave them debilitated. This incident threatened to leave Anita feeling depleted. The blood on the floor that belonged to my mom or blood on the streets from the damaged souls that we encountered needed mounds of salve, and we didn't have the knowledge or tools to grasp that. We just didn't. Chapter 8. Secret, Silent, Shame. The invisibility of the 1-2 punch that is blackness and poverty is brutal. School was our salvation. We coped by excelling academically. We loved learning. We didn't want to end up in the same situation as our parents, worrying where the next meal was coming from. School was also our haven. We stayed late, participating in sports, music, drama, and student government. My sisters and I became overachievers, even in areas that didn't interest us. Dolores and Diane made the Rhode Island and National Honor Society. They blazed a path for me, but at school, I was always so sleepy, hungry, and ashamed. I would arrive to school at 8 a.m. and by 8:30 I was falling asleep. For many years I had problems sleeping through the night. I never slept through the night. At best, I slept periodically, warily, because it was during the middle of the night that a lot of my parents' fights happened. If I got 2 hours of full sleep, I was lucky. We'd be awakened by a scream, a screech. The only hope, The only blessing was the fight that didn't last long. But sometimes their conflicts would last all night or night after night, for days. If it lasted all night, we did not sleep. Imagine your father beating your mom with a 2x4 piece of wood, slamming it on her back. The screams for help, the screams of anger and rage. That trauma would keep me up at night and make me fall asleep in class. I wet the bed until I was 14. I'd often go to school smelling. Having no hot water sure didn't help. Try washing up with ice-cold water and rarely any soap in the dead of winter. We chose between laundry detergent, soap, or dishwashing liquid. Usually, we substituted one for the other based on our needs. Hauling bags of laundry a mile or two in freezing temperatures, with ice and snow, was no picnic, and having the quarters for laundry was a luxury. So, usually the night before, we washed our clothes by hand in cold water and soap and hung them to dry. We would hang wet clothes over doors or a chair because a clothesline would be exposed to snow, rain, or freezing cold air that would make the clothes turn to ice. The next day, they were almost never dry, but we had no choice. We would put on wet clothes and they would dry as we went through our day. I reeked of urine. My sister Dolores and I went to Cowden Street School when I was in 4th grade and she in 5th. Dolores absolutely loved school. She was that student who came home excited if she had a test coming up. She was also a voracious reader. Before she entered 6th grade, she was consuming books like Wuthering Heights and those by Agatha Christie. And unlike me, she never got in trouble in school as she was very respectful of teachers. Well, one day Dolores came home excited about a science test. It's all she would talk about for a week. At this point, she wanted to be an archaeologist. On the day of her big science test, something different was happening in class for me. My teacher, who I loved, kept staring at me. Whenever I moved closer to her to answer a question, she would step back. Then I saw her talking to the teacher next door. Only a door separated the classes, so they would talk in the doorway. On this day, they whispered and looked at me. Finally, when we got in a circle to read, I ran to sit next to her and she leaned back with a distressed look on her face. She then gestured for me and whispered in my ear, "You need to tell your mother to get some soap and water and wash you. The odor is horrible." Then she shooed me away as if I had vomited on her. I was numb. A few minutes later I was called to the nurse's office. When I walked in, I saw Dolores. The nurse hadn't arrived yet. Dolores was sitting in a chair in front of the nurse's desk and she was catatonic. She obviously was called in for the same reason. I whispered, "Dolores, oh my God, can you believe?" But I never finished because she told me to shut up and she put her head down again. The nurse came in and gave a whole lecture of the complaints from teachers about our hygiene. She asked how we washed up. We said nothing. We were trained in the art of keeping secrets and we never, ever shared with anyone what went on in our home. Ever. She then proceeded to tell us how you should never wear the same underwear twice, how to wash up, how to use soap and what areas to wash first. Then we went home. Many decades later I brought up that day to Dolores and she told me her memories of that day. She said she had taken her science test and gotten an A. She was beyond excited and took her paper back to her desk. She was being incessantly bullied by a girl named Maxine. Maxine looked at my sister's test and went up to the teacher and said, "Miss, Dolores cheated." And without missing a beat the teacher called Dolores up to her desk, took her test from her, and put a big, red F on it. She was devastated, but she said this was a teacher who simply never liked her because she always got straight A's. She was the same teacher who told me in 2nd grade that black people could not read or write at all when they were slaves. I told Dolores I was sorry that happened to her and we didn't help her. She said, "That's okay, Viola." That was the day I decided to be a teacher. It devastated me so much that I didn't want another kid to go through what I went through. Dolores has been a brilliant teacher for the past 35 years. It's funny that with the complaints about hygiene, no one ever asked us about our home environment. No one asked us if we were okay or if anything was wrong. No one talked to us. There was a lack of intentional investment in us little black girls. A few people would drop what they called useful affirmations like, "Work hard, stay in school and do good. Be great, behave and don't get in trouble." There was an expectation of perfectionism without the knowledge of emotional well-being. What it left in me was confusion. How do I get to the mountaintop without legs? But we constantly push it with kids now, and when you're a poor kid growing up with trauma, no one is equipping you with tools to do better. To make a life. It's funny that I loved my 4th grade teacher so much and wanted her to love me with the same intensity. As traumatizing as it was to be told I smelled, it was worse feeling the shame. It was so overwhelming that I went home and did everything the nurse said. I washed my underwear, clothes, scrubbed my privacy, and underarms. It gave me such a sense of pride to go back to school the next day, clean. I sat in class with a huge smile and waited to be acknowledged for the change. But I wasn't. None of the teachers who complained ever really noticed us at all after that. You're expected to be clean, not celebrated. The invisibility of the 1-2 punch that is blackness and poverty is brutal. Mix that with being hungry all the damn time and it becomes combustible. If you're hungry, you can't focus, you have no energy. School lunch was our stable, assured meal. The food stamps our family received the first of each month paid for a grocery run. But the food soon ran out. When it was gone, my sisters and I mooched off the families of friends and dumpster dived, rummaging through garbage for food. I would befriend kids whose mothers cooked 3 meals a day and go to their homes when I could. One time a friend came over to our house, and when she opened the refrigerator and saw there was nothing in it, asked, "Are you guys moving?" I shoplifted food. I was 9 the last time I stole food from a store. That day I was caught slipping a brownie down the front of my pants, but I never got it out of the store. Because the owner screamed at me, looking at me like I was nothing. "Get out, go away and never come back." The shame forced me to stop. The experience of going to bed hungry is something that neither my sisters nor I will ever forget. I messed up all the time. I hid my feelings, my anger and pain, or I lashed out and got into fights. Detention every day. Back talk with teachers. I pushed a teacher once. I wanted attention really bad. I didn't know the butterflies that were ever present in the pit of my gut were actually massive anxiety. I felt I just didn't fit in. I was a whirling dervish of complexity and emotions. The true me was so trapped inside, like that demon inside of Regan in the movie The Exorcist. When Regan is tied to the bed to keep from harming herself and her body is racked by scars from this powerful demon, her mom's secretary comes barging in the room and as clear as day, slowly but deliberately, the words help me form on her belly. The sweet, kind, authentic, precocious Regan fighting to be released is still alive. Well, that's what I felt like, imprisoned and possessed by outside forces that were way more powerful than me. No one wanted to drink from the bubbla after me. Bubbla or bubbler was the Rhode Island term for water fountain. My classmates would always wait for the teacher to turn her head and whisper, "Yuck, I'm not drinking after that nigga. You're dirty." This would both shut me down and anger me. One day I tried to rip the pretty, yellow dress off Maria, a Portuguese girl who used the word nigga with impunity. My teacher punished me. I tried to explain, but she said there was no explanation. This was a teacher I loved, for whom I stayed after school once and volunteered to clean the chalkboard. She was young and pretty. I felt she liked me. This, unfortunately, was an illusion. I created a phantom to survive. We watched an American history film strip that day that had a blurb about slavery with pictures of black people in slave quarters down south. Everyone laughed when the images came up and the voiceover said, "Black people or slaves at this time were illiterate. That means they couldn't read or write." The kids laughed and whispered, "You niggas can't do anything." I stayed after class to ask my teacher one question. Despite being a troublemaker, despite pushing her once by accident, I was terrified as I waited until everyone was gone and quietly cleaned the entire chalkboard. She thanked me, and as I was leaving, I got up the courage to ask, "Miss, it's not true, is it? Black people could read and write. They could, couldn't they?" She shook her head sadly and said, "No, I'm sorry, honey, they couldn't." I left with my head down. She never explained to me or to the class that it was illegal during slavery to teach the enslaved to read and write. It was a way to keep them subjugated. I was looking for something or someone to define me, to infuse in me self-love, acceptance, to show me how to live, to show me I was all right. I held on to what I had, all that I had, the team effort with my older sisters. That preserved me. We were a girl posse, fighting, clawing our way out of the invisibility of poverty and a world where we didn't fit in. The world was our enemy. We were survivors until another squad member was introduced. She needed protection that we had no weaponry for. Chapter 9. Amuse. Y'all meet your baby sister. Me Alice Davis. When I was 11, another girl was added to our family, Danielle. We didn't have a phone, so when my mom went to the hospital in labor the night before Danielle was born, they said they would call the fire department once the baby was born. The next morning, my father made us wake up early and clean the house from top to bottom. It was his way of contributing and working out his nerves. We swept, wiped. Finally, a young man came running up the hill, out of breath with a piece of paper. It read, "Congratulations, a 7 pounds, 6 ounces baby was born this morning." We were so excited. We screamed and jumped up and down. It was a moment tattooed in my mind as pure, unbridled joy. My father told us to get dressed and we started our long walk to the hospital. It took us hours because we had no money for bus fare. But man, we were fueled by excitement. We walked single file, on the side of the road at times, on the sidewalk at other times. We finally made it to the hospital after a 2-hour trek, walked into the room, and saw my mom. She was lying down with a blanket over our baby. I remember her words precisely. "Y'all meet your baby sister." She pulled the blanket away and revealed the most beautiful baby, chocolate brown with the biggest afro. We cried, melted with love. I was the baby of the family before this time, but now I had a role of big sister. A type of transformation began to take place. At the time, I had no words to describe the shift to loving someone more than myself, seeing beyond myself. Words cannot explain our closeness. We did absolutely everything together. I never wanted to leave her, ever. It was as if life was injected into our lives. I changed diapers, put her to sleep, babysat, gave her medicine when she was sick, and held her tight when my parents fought. She was our cub and we accepted her into the pride. I was 11 and had already had my period for a year but was by no means grown. I had attitude for days. When I was at home, that attitude stopped cold. I was too terrified of my father. But at school, I was out of control, always talking out and back. My teachers sought every day to find ways to keep me still and quiet. I would get white and pink disciplinary slips. Pink was the worst. You get 3 pink slips, then you're suspended. I had 3 white and 2 pink. I would forge my dad's signature or get my sister to do it. It was a good thing we didn't have a phone or that would have been my ass. I was unsettled. I was an awkward, angry, hurt, traumatized kid. I couldn't articulate what I was feeling and nobody asked. I didn't believe anybody cared. I was saturated in shame. There was so much we didn't have or couldn't do, so much anger and violence that threatened the love. I was trying to be better. I focused on not wetting the bed. There were days I woke up dry but still days that even after going to the bathroom beforehand, I woke up soaked to my neck. My baby sister was a cure at this point, not for the bed wetting, but she was day-to-day joy because she loved me. She saw me. One day, Dolores and I were coming back from school. We neared the house and saw huge drops of blood on the pavement. Dolores whispered under her breath, "Oh my God." We got to our front steps and saw more blood in the front window on the door broken. We walked in and Anita and Diane looked shell-shocked. Diane was holding Danielle whose front shirt was saturated with blood. I almost screamed but Diane said, "She's asleep. Daddy is out looking for Mom. He said he's going to kill her." He busted her head open and she grabbed Danielle to leave and Daddy grabbed her back. We stopped them. The blood on Danielle was my mom's. We were terrified. Finally, my dad came back, pissed. The night before, I tried to stop him from beating my mama. He was still angry at me about that. "Get y'all asses out to help me look for your mama. Soon as we find her, I'm gonna kill her." Me and Dolores went out to help him look. He kept yelling at me to walk faster. Finally, he veered off to the right and told us to go to the left. Dolores was looking one way. I was looking another. I heard Dolores cry, "Viola." Oh my God, look. I looked to the left and there was my mom, in the Rixall drugstore window. Her face was totally bloodied. Her eyes were swollen shut. She had on a dirty turtleneck and pants. She was standing next to the ice cream freezer motioning for us to come in. Dolores ran away to get my dad. I went in. People started gathering around and I heard the ambulance siren. My mom was crying. Viola, your daddy's gonna kill me. I couldn't take it anymore. The clerk at the store, who was married to our science teacher, was leading the paramedics in and kept asking me, "What happened to her? What happened to your mom?" I couldn't speak. I looked to my mom to tell me what to say. What do I say? Do I expose our dirty secret? The paramedics tried to get my mom to the back room. My mom looked like a frightened animal or child. She didn't want to go back there alone, and with her arms outstretched she screamed, "Viola, come with me. Don't leave me." I just stood there and couldn't move. All I saw was the paramedics mouthing, "What happened to her?" I walked out of that drugstore. People I knew from school were among those gathered outside. "Viola, was that your mom? What happened?" I couldn't tell them that my mom is more than what you're seeing. The pity and the judgment saturated their faces. I wanted to scream out, "This is my mom. My mom. She's scared. But she is a survivor. She's somebody. I love her." But nothing came out of my mouth. I froze under the traumatic weight of the scrutiny and the judgment. Once again, I had no internal weaponry. It wouldn't occur to me until much later that this moment was not just about shame, value, or protection. It was about inheritance. I was given her blood, her eyes, her survival skills, her pain. My world was a constant train of imprinting. Because of the war zone that was our home, I always felt that I had to stay home to protect Danielle. The fights were brutal, with little attention paid to a baby in the line of fire when punches or knives were thrown. Mostly, we, her big sisters, just loved her. That was the best protection we could provide. After being the youngest for so long, Danielle's birth gave me a sense of responsibility. It was as if Flo Jo passed me the baton when I hadn't been practicing. I now had the last leg of the race to run, the clock ticking, on a journey where every other runner has 0% body fat and mine is at 40%. My shoes are untied. I can't see because I've got dry eye, but I still have to run my leg of the race. My practice run was being a primary schooler who was sent home, soaked with piss. Piss-soaked. I must now run holding my baby sister. I didn't have words to explain our poverty, dysfunction, trauma to Danielle, but I could hold her. I could love her, and that's it. I didn't have the tools to protect. I didn't know that I needed protection and guidance just as much as Danielle. I didn't know, nor could I admit, that I was broken. Danielle was 8 years old the summer between my first and second years of college. A weekend, in the middle of the day, while I was working at Brooks Drugs on Dexter Street around the block from our apartment, someone ran in and said, "Oh my God, Viola, you've got to come. Something's happened to your little sister." I ran outside and the cops were there, with my mom screaming at the top of her lungs. Mama had on my brother's sneakers and stood there crying, just shaking one fist in the air at this man who was sitting in the back of the cop car, handcuffed. With the other hand, she was holding my baby sister close to her. Danielle had been roller skating and still had her skates on. She was crying in my mom's arms. "That dirty bastard hurt my baby," Mama said. "Dirty motherfucker." Later, I found out that an older Portuguese man would frequent the corner store on Dexter Street and molest little girls who came in. Supposedly, he came to the store to buy cigarettes. However, he would hang out at the store and walk up and down the aisles offering to give young girls money if they allowed him to touch them. Danielle and one of her young friends roller skated to this store, which was maybe a minute from our house, to get some candy. They were in the candy aisle when the old man approached Danielle, speaking in Portuguese, trying to offer her money. She didn't know what he was saying. When he touched her privacy, she freaked out and she and her friend skated out of there fast. Her friend said, "You've got to tell your mom. You've got to tell your mom." Danielle told my mother and Mama put on the first shoes she saw, ran down to Dexter Street, and yelled, "You motherfucking son of a bitch, touched my daughter. There's a man in this store who touched my daughter. I'm going to call the police." The guys who owned the store tried to calm my mom down by saying, "Ma'am, he does that to all the little girls. It's not a big deal." My mom said, "It is a big deal, you motherfuckers," and then ran out of the store, into the middle of the street, flagged down the police, and identified the old man. "That's the man. This is what he did with my daughter. I'm pressing charges." That's the point where I was summoned. The cops had arrested him. Mama was cursing him, holding crying Danielle. He didn't speak English. The only thing the court system did was fine him. My sister got $9 a month for the next few months from the man who molested her. $9 a month. That was the fine. No charges were ever pressed. Danielle was our baby. Your first instinct when you love a child is to protect her from the pain of the world and life. The most excruciating revelation is when you realize you can't. To be human is not to be God. What that man was allowed to do is destroy souls. It was hard to pick up the pieces after that. She had the mammoth task of healing. To this day, almost 40 years later, she is still figuring out how to do that. Only thing I could do was love her. And I did and do. She is a reflection of me. Chapter 10. The starting block. I ain't never found no place for me to fit. Seem like all I do is start over. It ain't nothing to find no starting place in the world. You just start from where you find yourself. August Wilson. I wanted to be a great actor like Miss Tyson. I wanted to talk like an actor and train like an actor. The process and artistry of piecing together a human being completely different from you was the equivalent of being otherworldly. It also has the power to heal the broken. All that was inside me that I couldn't work out in my life, I could channel it all in my work and no one would be the wiser. And if I was good at it, I could make a life. It was perfect. All of it was a perfect alchemy for healing, acceptance, and worthiness. Then Ron Stetson, a young actor and coach, came into my life when I was 14. Ron Stetson was my acting coach in the federally funded program Upward Bound. For 6 weeks in the summer, I would live on a college campus and take classes. Usually there were 48 students from various communities in Rhode Island and from many different backgrounds. Our classes started at 8 a.m. and ended around 5 p.m. The summer program was meant to mirror college so that we could learn how to make that transition from high school to college. The classes, living with people from different backgrounds, being on your own. We were all first generation, higher education bound students. Our cohort was a mixed bag of college bound kids, each with their own crosses to bear. Some had huge language barriers, others challenging family environments, and still others with absolutely horrific stories of political abuse and genocide from their respective countries. I loved Upward Bound. It gave me a jolt of perspective and grace about my family situation. Someone who spent 4 years living in a jungle or watching a parent get their head blown off by militia made my problems seem small. I know they weren't. But it introduced me to the painful truth that everyone is going through something. The evenings were free time until 8 p.m. or 8:30 p.m. so after dinner they gave us a choice of an extracurricular activity. Drama was one of them. In came Ron, who to me was the coolest, most handsome, unique, dynamic individual I had ever met. He drove a beat-up car that had no door on the passenger side. Way cool. He put a sheet of plastic in its place so you wouldn't fall out or get wet from the rain. He wore flip-flops, tank tops, and jeans. He was not only cool, he was different. He had different views of the world, people, race. He spoke his mind. In fact, all the counselors and teachers there did. They blew a hole in my world and opened up a new space that I could occupy. Ron gave me 2 huge gifts that changed my life. The first happened during our first day in acting class. He asked all 14 of us how many wanted to be actors. We all raised our hands. You know you have to work fucking hard every fucking day, he said. A fourth of the hands went down. But, I thought, wow, that is awesome. Every day, he repeated. More hands down. You can go on an audition every freaking day for 6 weeks and never, ever, get a job. You know that, right? More hands down. My hand remained raised, as if reaching for the sky. And you're gonna get rejected time and time and time again, Ron continued. I was the only one now who had my hand up. He kept going at me. You're gonna get egg on your face. You're gonna fail. Your family is not going to understand what you do and neither will most people. I kept my hand up, staring at him. When you haven't had enough to eat, when your electricity and heat are cut off, you're not afraid when someone says life is going to be hard. The fear factor was minimized for me. I already knew fear. My dreams were bigger than the fear. He stared at me. Okay, let's get back to class. The second gift Ron gave happened at our rap party at his house. My sister Dolores, who was also in the class, was talking to me about some boy. I don't remember what exactly she was saying to me, but somewhere in there was a reference to us not being pretty. He said, "Wait, you both don't think you're pretty." Why? We looked at each other completely embarrassed and laughed. I said, "Ron, no one in Central Falls thinks we're pretty. We've never had boyfriends. We've never kissed anyone." There was a very uncomfortable shift in the air. "What, Ron? Most of the people in Central Falls are white and they just..." Dolores and I were at a loss for words. "You both are fucking beautiful. I always thought that. You don't see it." The air in the room shifted again. Or was it the air in our lungs? It's that life-changing thing that happens when you're seen, valued, and adored. Adoration for girls validates our femininity. When you are a dark-skinned girl, no one simply adores you. They laugh with you, tell you their secrets, treat you like one of the boys. But there's no care given to you, no devotion given to you. The absence of that becomes an erasure. I learned so much from Ron that first summer of my drama training. He said, "Theater awakens the imagination." Imagination. The mind's ability to create ideas and images. That's what was injected in me when Ron stated with so much conviction, "You're beautiful." It opened up another space in my world where I actually could be anyone or anything I wanted to be. I could define my world in that space and piggyback to my world. Stronger. Like Wonder Woman spinning and transforming into this superhuman being that could bust through lies and beat down 200-pound men. He gave me the first ingredient I needed to be an artist, the power to create, the power of alchemy. That magical process of transformation and creation to believe at any given time I could be the somebody I always wanted to be. He also gave all of us something even more special. A sacred space where we could all share without shame or fear. A space where we could share our deepest, darkest secrets and they would be received with love and empathy. He encouraged us not to hold it in. And man, oh man, did he love it when we did anything bold, odd, unique. He would just exclaim loudly, "Fucking look at that." I became an actor because it's a healing wellspring. Upward Bound was a melting pot of races. What we shared, besides all being desperately poor, was a passion to be the first generation in our families to get an education and be high achievers. In the evenings, when we were allowed to connect, the stories were bone-chilling. We were the blacks, whites, Cambodians, Laotians, Hmong, Vietnamese, Angolan, African Portuguese, Dominicans, Puerto Ricans. The Southeast Asians would primarily have stories of their entire family being slaughtered and escaping to the jungle only to have to live there for months, sometimes years, before finding a refugee camp, where some contracted malaria. Most had language barriers or severe health concerns, but all were exceptional students. All had a willingness to share. It was the first place I knew where Joe, Phi, Vanna, Maria, Peaches, and Susie were on the same playing field. Suddenly, my stories of hardship seemed small, an awareness I felt God was orchestrating. I wanted my story to be small. I wanted it to shrink like a tumor down to a manageable size. Drama provided an escape. The emotional release acting aloud gave me great joy. Perfect joy. When I was acting, I felt everything. Every last receptor in my body was alive. 100% alive. And I was not hiding anything. I felt free to talk about all kinds of different shit when I was in a group with other actors. That's why the most troubled students would always be put in drama class. Everybody vomits. Everybody is allowed to disclose their trauma, share their stories of horrific sexual or physical abuse, unmask really quirky humor, reveal their deepest, darkest secrets, everything. People listen with empathy, 100% on board, supportive. But, then you have to go out into the world as you. You move through your life trying to retain the life force you had on that stage and in that class. Whoopi Goldberg, as the medium in the movie Ghost, had a talent to channel all these souls. Some were good and some weren't. But regardless, she then had to come back to herself and her life. As an actor, you become a soul searcher, a thief. After the curtain call, you are left with you. When I went to Upward Bound, I hadn't wet the bed in over a year. I was so proud. But then, out of the blue, my first night of our 6 weeks on a college campus, I woke up and I was wet, shocked, ashamed, and said, "No one can come in this room." I didn't have a roommate, but there were pseudomates, 12 little rooms in the suite. My room was probably 150, 200 square feet. I had gone to my room and proudly set it up with whatever I had, which was next to nothing. That was the last time I wet the bed. It pissed me off. I thought I had more control. My lesson from Upward Bound was you have to open your mouth and own your friggin' story. That terrified me more than rats. Chapter 11. Being Seen. May you live long enough to know why you were born. Cherokee birth blessing. From 9th grade until I finished high school, we lived on Park Street. Then Parker Street because we were evicted from the house on Park Street. Parker Street was an attic apartment, tiny, with slanted ceilings and only 2 bedrooms. My sister Anita had gone to college and got her own apartment. Diane was long gone. She'd gone to Howard University when we were on Park Street and made her home in Washington, D.C. So it was only me and my sisters Dolores and Danielle, with my mom and dad. My brother, John, was never around. We were cut off welfare because they found out that my father was still living with us and he was making a salary. It was not a living wage, but it was a salary. Back in the day, they'd just cut you off. When we were evicted, we got shopping carts, put in everything that fit, and wheeled over to Parker Street to the tiny attic apartment on the 3rd floor. If I had to carry a shopping cart of belongings up 3 winding flights of stairs now, I'd not make it. It was that abrupt. We had to get out. I was in the 10th grade when we were forced to make that move. Aside from not paying rent, this is how the eviction happened. My mom and dad got into a brutal, bloody fight with Carlos, the landlord. The fight may have been about the rent. Carlos was Portuguese with a very heavy accent, and it was obvious this was the last straw. He wanted to move a family member into the house and was tired of my parents not paying rent. They would always make promises then get so behind. He was done. My dad was convinced Carlos was racist. When my dad felt any hint of being seen as less than, he let loose. I understood the man just wanted them to pay the rent. Carlos came by with his wife demanding their money. My dad began to argue with him after he said we had to get out. The argument escalated. My dad had come home that day with a new toy, a machete. He had it wrapped in a towel, newly sharpened. Carlos saw the machete and started screaming that my dad was planning to attack him. He tried to grab it from my dad, who subsequently tried to grab it back. Carlos's wife freaked out and tried to grab it as well. Mama. Not wanting to be left out, she started grabbing too. It became a game of tug-of-war with screaming, crying, cussing. Everyone yelling different commands in Portuguese and English. Let go. No, you let go. You're trying to kill me. No, I wasn't. I was bringing it in the house, motherfucker. It ended with Carlos getting sliced under his arm. My dad's hand, I think, was also sliced and we were, well, evicted. So relieved was Carlos that we were leaving. It's probably the reason he never pressed charges. At this point, I was trying to leave the last vestiges of my bad behavior behind and was focused on achieving as much as I could. Once again, I hadn't made the connection that my behavior matched the chaos at home. I was a powder keg of secrets. I kept them in because it allowed me to get through my day. I couldn't let what I was feeling out. Any chance I had to be a part of something where I could make a mark, I joined in. Teachers at Central Falls Sr. High school and counselors were my lifeline. Mr. Aces, Mr. Yates, Mr. Perkins, Jeff Kenyon, Mariam Boyajian. Mr. Aces, who was a doppelganger to Gene Wilder, only smaller, was my science teacher in 9th grade. He was also the musical director and glee club instructor. I drove him crazy. I was just bad. I talked too much. I was the classic theater kid who needed a creative outlet and couldn't find one, so I created it for myself. Inappropriately, in class. In other words, I acted out. Literally. He was always screaming at me. In 9th grade, he threw me out of his class and they put me in another science class. There was no one in that science class I knew, so it shut me right the fuck up. I didn't have anyone to act out with. A few years later, he came into one of my classes and said, "Viola, I have something for you." "What is it?" He said. "I went to a dentist appointment today, and as I was in the waiting room, I see this pamphlet, Viola." And it was a pamphlet for arts recognition and talent search, a national competition in Miami, Florida. In 5 disciplines: drama, visual arts, dance, music, and writing. Each had its own format. 30 kids in each category were to be chosen for an all-expenses-paid trip to Miami. It was only for kids entering their senior year of high school. "You can enter in drama," he said. "What do you get?" I asked. He looked through the pamphlet. "Scholarship money, I think." "I can't do that. A national competition." The pamphlet was thick and contained a laundry list full of things you had to do simply to apply. As he stood there, I read it out loud, believing with every word I uttered the utter absurdity of it. I had to put together a tape of a classical monologue and a contemporary monologue. I had to fill out a huge application form with an essay. And then, of course, there was an application fee. "I can't do that," I repeated. "Well, think about it," he said. When I looked at it, I thought about you. I thought about you, Viola. The throwing me out of class was all because he saw me. He saw what was in me. I kept staring at the pamphlet. Eventually, I shared the pamphlet and its impossible opportunity with my upward-bound counselor, Jeff Kenyon. You could call upward-bound counselors by their first name. You could call Jeff in the middle of the day and say, "Hey Jeff, I'm having an anxiety attack and I'm in the middle of science class. Can you help me out?" And he would be there. He was always there. He was the first person who took me and my sister Dolores to a political party gathering so that we understood what political campaigning was all about. He was the first person to take us to the Rhode Island Black Heritage Society so we could learn about abolitionist ex-slaves who could read and write and were instrumental in freeing others from bondage. As white as he was, Jeff taught us a lot about Black history. He heard me and my sister talk one day in his car and picked up on our ignorance about our own history. That was it. That was all the impetus he needed to spring into action. He would pick us up in the middle of the week, take us to get some food, talk to us to see how we were doing. "What's going on?" he asked that week. "Well, my science teacher," and I told him the story, ending with "but I can't do it." He was silent. I could see him suppressing anger. He said, "Let me see the pamphlet." He looked through it and then asked, "Why can't you do it?" "Because, Jeff, I don't have a VHS tape." "How much are VHS tapes?" "Well, I don't know, but they are probably." "I'll get you the VHS tape." Silence. "Yeah, thanks, but I don't have the $15 application fee." "Viola, I will get you a $15 waiver for the application fee." Silence. "Well, Jeff, I have to film myself doing 2 monologues. Where am I going to film it?" "Viola, there's a TV station on the campus of Rhode Island College. I know the people in the TV station. You can film the monologues in the TV station." After a long pause, he said, "You've run out of excuses." And he was right. It was now time for me to, as I've heard Black people say so many times, shit or get off the pot. So, I shit. I got my monologues together. I went up to Rhode Island College where Dolores was a student. She was so excited. I kept changing clothes, most of which belonged to Dolores, in her room, searching for the right look. I went to the TV station. I filmed my classical and contemporary monologues. I filled out my application. I sent it all in. Free from the chains of my excuses, I was handling my business and exercising my agency. Instead of sitting around doing nothing and claiming that agency was a win in and of itself, thousands applied in the competition for drama alone, and only 30 would be chosen. I didn't believe I had a chance, but I was proud that I did it, that I did the hard, arduous work of applying. I remember walking home from school one day with my friend Kim Hall as we had done on countless occasions. On this particular day, as we neared my home, I looked ahead in the distance and all of the sudden I saw Mama running toward us, not casually jogging, but sprinting top speed, like her life depended on it. Now, you have to understand, Mama is real country, as she was Olympic sprinting in our direction. I noticed that she did so wearing my brother's shoes. I don't know why she had my brother's shoes on. Probably, she couldn't find hers. But as she drew closer and closer to us, we could see clearly that she was going nuts, waving this piece of paper in her hand, sprinting, yelling. It was a Western Union note, something foreign to those younger than Generation Zers like myself. Think of it like a text, but in physical rather than instant, electronic form. Mama didn't even take time to catch her breath before revealing the contents of message. "You have been chosen to come to Miami Florida, for the Arts Recognition and Talent Search competition. I was frozen, silent, frozen like I had been as my sisters yelled at me to throw that firecracker out the window. Frozen like when my entire family begged me to jump down from what we thought was our burning apartment. Frozen like when I sat silently all those many times while being lectured by teachers, nurses, and principals about my bad hygiene. But this was a good kind of frozen, a spectacular, glorious kind of frozen. Dumbfounded by the sheer unbelievability of the news my mom was sharing with me, stupefied by the idea that the work I invested in a crazy dream actually paid off, astonished that individuals I had never met actually saw me and deemed me worthy to participate in this prestigious competition. I could not for the life of me see myself as one of the chosen few, but of the 1,200 applications, I was one of the 30. I got an all-expenses-paid trip to Miami. I was in. I don't recall exactly what I said to my mother when I broke out of my stupor, but whatever it was accompanied by a lot of screaming, laughter, and tears. I was such a crybaby. That summer going into the 12th grade was the first time I flew on an airplane. I felt really out of place in Miami. That trip was one of the biggest things that had ever happened to me. My 2 monologues were from Everman and Runaways, which had a lot of great monologues about feeling abandoned. I forget which particular one I performed. It could have been Footsteps or it could have been the last monologue in the play. They were all delicious in the sense that they provided actors a smorgasbord of feelings and emotions to tap into and share with audiences. And now I had the opportunity to share all those feelings, so many of which came out of my own experiences, with the best of the best gathering in Miami. That being said, I felt so out of place around the best talent in the country. We stayed at the brand new Hyatt Regency Hotel in Miami. News outlets were there that week, even Good Morning America. Great actors, dancers, musicians, visual artists from the Tonius Performing Arts School arrived in full regalia. I came with a $30 dress from a store in downtown Pawtucket and a $2 suit from St. Vincent de Paul. I was overwhelmed and utterly not prepared artistically. Neither was I prepared socially. These kids were in their bodies, confident or at least good pretenders, and rowdy. I was none of those things. And on top of that, I was intensely shy. I felt alone. Looking back, I see I had more social anxiety than shyness. I felt that who I really was not worthy of a reveal. I was terrified every time she had to come out. My roommate was a girl from Pennsylvania who talked about winning, who she thought was great, who wasn't. She wanted it, whatever it was. She would torture herself after every daily audition. I didn't understand. I was just trying to survive. I did great with my monologues. Afterward, it seemed that everyone wanted to know me. Everyone loves a winner. When I had to do my improvisations, which I loved, I froze. There were 5-minute, 3-minute, and 1-minute improvs. After I froze, there was a collective silence that settled over me and the rest of the group. It was a week of 5-course meals, boat trips, television crews, media attention. In spite of the momentary lapse during the improvs, my talent was being recognized. However, my talents and the recognition that came with it were far more evolved than me, Viola. I didn't feel worthy. All the symbols that could give me status, I never had. Now, one was within reach. I was named a promising young artist and was lauded at City Hall once I got home. It was a big deal in Central Falls even though I didn't win any scholarship money. If I created a fable of my life, a fantasy, I see myself finally meeting God, gushing, crying, thanking the Almighty for the accolades. A fabulous husband, beautiful daughter, my journey from nothing to Hollywood, awards, travel. I can clearly see the Lord's face, staring at me, taking me in and saying, "You never thanked me for creating you as you."